using these opportunities to invite and connect and share ideas, innovations. And please, if you have something that you want to share next time, just contact us. We'd love to check the opportunity to include you in our webinars in the future. Now, at Access Israel, we believe that beyond sharing successes, we should also share points in need of improvement. When you do, no matter how hard you try, something can always go wrong, or at least it won't be ideal for everybody. As long as we make sure to learn and improve from one event to another, this is what we call the path to an accessible future. Plan, do, succeed, make mistakes, learn from mistakes, share, improve. That's the way to do it. And that is what we will be doing today. This past summer, the eyes of the world were aimed at the TV screen with broadcasts from the Olympics and the Paralympic Games. In Israel, I can tell you, we are very proud to have year after year medals coming home, inspiring Israelis to determination, strength, going above and beyond, and really showing that the sky is the limit. I wanted to start spelling out and mentioning everybody that won a medal or participated, but time is limited here. So I really want to tell the entire Paralympic team, we are proud of you. We have today participants, not only from Israel, but from all over the world, to talk about the accessibility in the Paralympic Games and how we can... Hold on. If you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
1 second. Thank you. Now, so we want to, the accessibility, we are going to talk about the accessibility in the Paralympic Games and how we can all make sure that as we progress to a more accessible era, we make sure that sports are accessible for all. We will hear how it was in the past, and I'm talking past. We have here an amazing representative from 1964, again from Tokyo, who will share with us, and several more that will share from past events. This is a surprise for later. What was good? What needed improvement? We will hear from professionals who were in charge of the accessibility in Tokyo 2020 and those who will take the lead in Paris 2024. We will hear studies on the effect of the Paralympics on our cities, our perceptions, and we will get to know Paralympians from all over the world and technologies which help them, and much, much more. Now, from looking at your countries and cities of origin, we see that we, as always, have a very diverse group. Some of us in a very advanced accessibility place, and others less accessible locations. But still, I can promise you that this webinar will be relevant to us all. The focus is not just about cutting edge technological innovations, but also about human innovations and how thoughtfulness and out of the box thinking could give life to new models of accessibility. Our wish is that each and every one of you will come out of this webinar learning something amazing from the speakers that we have today. I would like to say, and we're at the end of the opening remarks, I would like to say thank you to our sponsors for this webinar, our great friends and partners at Google, who have been a great support of our international activities and especially the webinars until now. I'd also like to thank the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee, Mr. Mike Peters and Craig Spence. They are true activists for promotion of Paralympic sports. They have supported our webinar above and beyond, and we cannot express how deep our appreciation is. We will hear from them later. I would like to take this opportunity and thank our other friends and partners who I must say I miss dearly. Enough with this remoteness. Can't wait to see you all. The Zero Project Gang, who is represented here by Robin, we'll hear from him in a second. Valuable 500. Phaser, Friends of Access Israel, hello Jamie. Deborah Rue Global, Enable from Kenya, Manzil from the Emirates, Once from Spain, IAAP from the USA, the Austrian Association for the Blind from Austria, Global Ramp from Israel, and Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation from the USA, and many, many more. And I'm happy to add Atos to the list, with our great friends Neil Milliken and Ricardo Garcia Belamonte, who just joined the team of Atos just recently. And we are always proud when one of our partners and friends advances and continues to promote accessibility and inclusion globally. So, Ricardo, good luck to you from all of us. As a network, it gives me great satisfaction not only to promote what Access Israel is doing, but also to share and enable you to enjoy what our dear partners are doing. So the highlights for this time, we have two. First of all, our friends at the Helen Hamlin Center for Design at the Royal College of Art in London, Rama and Eva, are starting an exciting session of events on inclusive design to celebrate 30 years of the center. The event starts on Monday, November 8th, between 4 and 5 p.m. UK time. I really urge you to come and join that event. Another news that we had to share is from Kenya, from Enable. We're happy to share that the Kenya Bureau of Standards are developing national ICT accessibility standards this week in Kenya, involving many stakeholders, and it will be the first in Africa, creating an opportunity to transform various sectors and knowledge sharing and supporting for other countries. This is really impressive, and way to go, Irene and the entire team. Okay, we are beginning. I would like to remind our speakers, please speak clearly, slowly, so everyone can follow. This is an international crowd. Let's dive in. Our first speaker for opening statement is Robin Tim Weiss from Zero Project. Robin is the public sector manager at Zero Project. Robin, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Michal. And as you mentioned, I'd like to start off with a visual description. I'm a white male in his early 30s, wearing a dark blue navy blazer, a white baby blue dress-up shirt, wearing a pin of our foundation, the Zero Project, which is a green seedling, which is emerging out of a circle, and I have a 3-day beard on me. With that being said, good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining us from around the world. It's truly a privilege for the Zero Project to be able to take part again in an Access Israel International webinar. As Michal mentioned, this is the 10th international webinar for Access Israel, and I would say couldn't be more timely than ever, since we're tackling the topic of Paralympic Games, accessibility, and inclusion on the cusp of the thrilling Tokyo Games we all got to experience, and the games which were organized and managed by many of the great speakers in this very webinar. Michal mentioned my name, Robin Tim Weiss. I'm the public sector manager at the Zero Project, and what I would like to do is also to extend a big toda rabba to you, Michal, but also the entire Access Israel team, who has gone above and beyond again with this webinar. But I think even more importantly, goes above and beyond for persons with disability in Israel and beyond on a daily basis, creating valuable programs and initiatives which really and truly remove barriers for all. So Michal, you mentioned 80 countries. Yuval this morning messaged us over WhatsApp that we had registrations from 79 countries. And already back then, I have to say, I was not surprised. I really was not surprised in the slightest, because I believe it truly highlights and exemplifies what we've seen not only recently with the We the 15 campaign, but in disability inclusion in general. I mean, the idea that to remove barriers for all touches all and resonates with all. And our foundation, the Zero Project, has identified innovative practices and innovative policies that have removed those barriers for persons with disabilities since 2007. And the UN CRPD was our igniting spark. And since then, we've really been committed to sharing global good practices as it is envisaged in Article 32 of the UN CRPD. And we're currently fortunate to have partners in 180 countries around the world. And that's where I see that disability inclusion is really a team sport, that we can only win as a collective. So for those of you who know me, they know that I'm actually a quite big football fan, namely a fan of a provincial Bavarian club by the name of Bayern Munich. Some of you might have heard of. So I will use a football metaphor to underline what I think we need to aim for in order to continue to remove barriers for all. Because in football, on paper, it's a 11 players against 11 players game. 22 players lost on a big pitch. But anyone who's experienced football will tell you that football is so much more than that. It's the fans, the emotion, and all that comes together and, you know, proverbially is able to move mountains. And I think it is this joint collective that elevates football to the global prominence it enjoys today. And in a similar fashion, I'm absolutely convinced that campaigns and initiatives such as We the 15 will also succeed in a similar fashion by elevating the importance and visibility for dignity for all around the world. The Zero Project is extremely fortunate and honored to have been part of the We the 15 as a founding committee member. And you will hear more about the world's biggest human rights movement later from great speakers such as Craig Spence from the International Paralympic Committee. So all I can say is please lean in rather than lean back and enjoy this riveting webinar, because it really brings together some of the most exciting actors and initiatives in the disability inclusion space. And all I can say is thank you and warm greetings to you all from the Zero Project here in Vienna, Austria.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I always say that you guys are the one who gave me the international bug. So you taught me the power of international connection, and I'm very, very proud to call you guys our friends. So our next opening remark will come from Shuki or Yoshua Israeli from the Paralympic, Dr. Shuki Yoshua Dekel from the Israel Paralympic Committee and former director of the Sports Authority in the Ministry of Sports in Israel. Shuki, please.
Thank you, Michal. I'm wearing a black shirt, as you see. I hope you see. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from Israel. My friend, Mr. Yuval Wagner, founder and president of Access Israel, and Michal Rimon, CEO, my colleagues from IPC, Mr. Mike Peters, CEO, and Mr. Craig Spence, Chief Brand of Communication Officer, distinguished participants. I'm glad that participating together with me in this important webinar are Dr. Osnat Phyllis-Duer, Director of Science and Technology Unit in our Israeli Paralympic Committee, and our kayak athletes, Pascal Berkowitz, and one of our Tokyo medalists, silver medalist, Moran Samuel. A month ago, we returned from the Paralympic Games in Tokyo. Our team achieved a level of accomplishment that is without precedent, and in doing so, moved all our nation. Our team included 33 athletes, included Jews, Muslims, and Druze athletes with motor disabilities, and blind and visually impaired athletes as well. Our athletes won 9 medals, including 6 gold medals, 2 silver medals, and 1 bronze medal. The Israeli media have brought the experience and the excitement to every home. Our athletes proved that the impossible is possible. They showed that everyone is able. Since the ending of the Games, I have received many requests from mayors and heads of sport clubs who wish to open clubs and sport centers for youth and adults with disabilities. I believe that our athletes are an example that everybody is equal, and they proved that in Tokyo Paralympic Games. All that we ask to give them an equal opportunity, and especially to make daily life accessible for them. By that, I mean accessibility that is safe, convenient, and respectful for residents, study, recreation, in restaurants and coffee shops, public transportation, health centers, etc. Throughout the Corona year, especially in situation of quarantine, the problem of communication through digital media formats are aroused of the entire population. More should be done to make information accessible to the blind, to the visually impaired, the deaf, and hard of hearing, and the motor disabled. We are aware that problem is being addressed, but Not enough being done, and there remains much more to do. My friend Yuval Wagner, chairman of Access Israel, and his team are doing a lot. I hope that this webinar will encourage the authorities and the government to do more, much more. I wish you all a useful and interesting webinar. Thank you very much. Michal?
Ken, please.
Thank you very much, Shuki, and thank you, everyone. I'm Yuval Wagner. I'm bold, wearing a yellow. Don't see me? No?
Yes.
Hi. So again, I'm Yuval Wagner, and I'm happy to be with you. I'm bold, wearing glasses, yellow shirt, and excited to be here on this very, very unique and special event after the Paralympic Tokyo Games, where again, super exciting games. And it was an opportunity to raise and talk about the issue of accessibility in the Paralympics before, in the past, now, and in the future. And it's so amazing because the Paralympics, it's not only about those superheroes, that one of them is my father that you will hear in a few minutes. And it's about the potential. It's about the effect. And we see in Israel and all over the world that the world is starting to recognize, using the Paralympic sportsmen and the whole theme of the Paralympics as a way of promoting the equality and inclusion and accessibility for people with disabilities. So what happens actually is something very interesting. As you know, Access Israel is all the time talking about stop doing things retroactively. It's about time that in 2021, everything we do should be thought in advance, be designed in advance, and be accessible and inclusive in advance or by design. And so the idea is every time to learn, because the world is progressing, things are changing. So we each time have to learn and we have to implement for the next time. And what we see is that the importance of the Paralympics is not only about the sports and being there, showing how those amazing people are doing some great results, and in the future, probably better results than the ones that are without disabilities. But what's the important thing, or the important challenge, is how to take this amazing event and make a ripple effect on improving the lives of people with disabilities. So it's not only about sports, it's about awareness, and we will talk about it later with Craig and with the 15 campaign. It's about accessibility, but not only the accessibility of the games themselves for the participant and the spectators, but it's also about making the city accessible, making the transportation accessible, making the tourism accessible, making employment accessible. It's making our life accessible. So the challenge of the IPC, and I talked a lot with Mike, and thanks Mike for IPC, and Craig, you're such great friends and partners, and looking forward to do a lot of things with you in the future. The challenge is much larger. And today in this event, I hope you all have a taste of what already amazing achievements that have been done from 1964 to now, from Tokyo 1964 to now, and also looking forward to see in the future what will happen in future games and future cities and future countries, because and I'll finish by that. In 2021, the half glass of accessibility inclusion is pretty much full. but the half-empty glass is very, very challenging to fill up. So let's all of us, the network of Access Israel, of making the future accessible by design, let's work on that together and make the world much more accessible by design. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Okay, guys, you're going to see me in 2 seconds. I will describe and explain why this transition is done. I'm not the conventional moderator, and I love sharing with you what's going on here with us, with the excitement and everything. So whoever saw the webinars in the past, you can say that we look good now, right? We have here, I'm sitting in a green room with a lot of new lights and appliances. So thank you to my team, to Tuvia, to Noah, who made this possible. But now we're doing the transition. We had an accessible spot here for Yuval, and now I'm continuing. So thank you, Yuval. Thank you very much. And now we will continue with something that I was very, very excited to include in this in today's webinar. I am inviting, I don't know if many of you know, but Yuval's father, Danny Wagner, is not only Yuval's father and Danny, a person with a lot of accomplishments by himself, he is also a Paralympian medalist from Tokyo, but not 2020 Tokyo. We are talking all the way back to 1964. And with him, we have Pascal Berkowitz, our dear, dear, dear friend and partner, a Paralympic athlete, a film director, and a true inspiration representing Israel in 4 Paralympic Games. And together, they have 5 Paralympic Games of experience. They will provide a great review of development they've seen over the years in the Paralympic Games and activities. Pascal and Danny, please, to you.
Can you hear me now?
We can't hear. Pascal?
Now, can you hear me?
Danny, you have to unmute yourself, and Pascal also.
Unmute?
Yes. Hi, Danny, and now Pascal.
Can you hear me?
You see me?
Yes, we do. If you can set the camera so we can see your entire face. Oh, that's perfect. And just we're waiting for Pascal.
I am here.
Here, I see you, Pascal, but we don't hear you for some reason.
I am unmuted, so you should hear me.
Can we hear her?
I can hear her, but very silently.
Yeah, if you can increase the volume, maybe.
Okay, I'll try that.
As I said, no matter how much we prepare, there's always some technicality that goes wrong, but we take it with a smile, guys. And believe me, Pascal is worth waiting for. We'll wait to Pascal. We're waiting. No problem.
No, but I'm perfect, so.
You can't maybe connect from the phone, and then we'll hear you from the phone. That maybe works for us. And while you are fixing that,
I don't know, because for me it's all set, so.
For some reason we cannot hear. Okay, so Pascal will reconnect in a second, and in the meanwhile, I will begin, Danny, with you. And I know you and Pascal agreed upon how to begin and how to start, so lead the way. Please introduce yourself.
I am Dan, as you say. I have some gray hair. I'm wearing an orange shirt, and I'm a paraplegic, paralyzed from the waist down, and I'm confined to a wheelchair. Now, the idea is that I will speak about the accessibility in Tokyo in 1964. So pretend that you're asking me, how was the accessibility in 1964? And
how was the accessibility, Dan, in 1964?
Oh, accessibility was maybe just a word in the dictionary. Nobody used the word, nobody heard it before. we arrived in Tokyo after like a flight from hell. 30 hours or more, we were in the seats of the airplane. We were boarding the airplane like sacks of potatoes. We were carried each one by 2 persons and put in our seats and did not move for 30 hours. So part of the way I spent on my knees looking at the back of the seat so I'll relieve my little bottom a little bit. We arrived at the Olympic Village, which was the facility that was used by the able-bodied sportsmen. And it was accessible but for able-bodied people. So the roads inside the village were paved. But other than that, the doors were narrow, the bathrooms weren't fitted with railings, and it was really a nightmare. So that's about it, about the accessibility in the Olympic Village. Now,
great. And what sport did you play in that Paralympic Games?
I was on the basketball team. At that time, the differentiation between the different kinds of disabilities was kind of flimsy. But we had 2 basic categories. One was incomplete, people that were somehow paralyzed, but they were able to walk and had maybe partial movements. And the other group, which I belonged to, was the complete. We were confined to wheelchairs and we lived on wheelchairs. And we played very well. We got the bronze medal and we beat countries like Holland and France. So we were pretty good. And
very good. And I see Pascal joined us. Let us give another try to Pascal. Pascal, can you try to talk and we'll see that we're hearing you? Pascal? Okay. Hold on here. I see that she is connecting. Okay, so Danny, so you're saying you're painting a picture that is a lot of determination, a lot of love of the game, but a lot of a reality that was definitely, as you said, accessibility only in the dictionary.
Yeah.
And did you get a chance to see and view or hear the things that have changed and are happening today?
Yeah, I had a chance. I had a chance to experience it. And it's a quantum leap from Tokyo.
Totally. So, Danny, what we will do is I really hope that we can bring Pascal later on. I don't want to stall it even more. So I will try to bring you guys also later. But I think that you gave a great beginning for this webinar, because from here, we have to only go up. Pascal, last chance. Let's try to see and hear you. Unmute yourself. Unmute, Pascal. Okay. Here. Okay, Pascal, can you hear me? Okay, so Danny, we will try to get back to you guys later. And I will pass now to Mike Peters. Mike Peters is the CEO of the International Paralympic Committee, and he will give us a holistic view. Mike, after you heard Danny now, give us news. What's going on now? Please, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. And it's an absolute delight to be with you today. Let me start with a self-description. I'm wearing a medium blue blazer with a white dress shirt underneath. I have glasses and an aging beard, but generally speaking, I would say I look younger than I am. All right. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I also am a two-time Paralympic athlete. And Tim, I was going to say in the sport of football, 7-a-side football. I competed for the United States in 1996 in Atlanta and also 2004 in Athens. And Donnie, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you and hear from you. Really, really excited to hear about your experience and happy to share with everyone on today's webinar some of the things that are happening with us now. Let me also warn you, Tim, that my colleague Craig will certainly reference Leeds United now that you've referenced Bayern Munich. Let me start by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I really am delighted to be with you today, both to participate in this important discussion and because I am a new and huge fan of Access Israel. Yuval and I were introduced to each other only very recently, but honestly, talking with him was like speaking to a longtime friend. I found his story captivating. We discovered that we have relationships with some brilliant people and some wonderful organizations in common. And I see some of you here on the screen and many familiar names and faces. And perhaps most importantly, I was able to learn more about the important and impressive work of Access Israel. Being as everyone here, you're participating in this webinar, I can only assume that most of you knew about Access Israel long before I did. And I want to thank you for supporting and or participating in their great work, whether by collaboration or by advancing your own related vision. Speaking of vision, I will assume that some or even many of you on this call are familiar with the International Paralympic Committee, the IPC, and the work that we do. But by way of background, let me just say that the vision of the IPC is to make for an inclusive world through parasport. Now, we're a sport organization first and foremost, but we do what we do because we want to change the world. We believe that change starts with sport and that the work of the Paralympic movement is a catalyst for driving social inclusion and advancing the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The IPC is a purpose-driven, nonprofit member association based here in Germany. Our mission is to lead the Paralympic movement, oversee the delivery of the Paralympic Games, and support our 200-plus member organizations to enable para-athletes to achieve their sporting excellence. And since 1989, we're a fairly young organization, but since 1989, we've been creating change through sport with the Paralympic Games and the Paralympic athletes at our very core. As you'll hear about later today from my esteemed colleague, Craig Spence, the IPC seeks to use the global position that we have of the Paralympic movement and the growing profile of Paralympic athletes and para-athletes and the We the 15 campaign to challenge the stigma attached to disability and empower social transformation for the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities who present 15%, as you know, of the global population. Over the years, our primary vehicle for creating change has been the Paralympic Games and the Paralympic Winter Games. We've witnessed time and again the transformative power of the Paralympic Games to positively change a city, a region, a society. In my own case, it was quite personal, having allowed me a whole new beginning on my life. And also both my father and my brother live with muscular dystrophy. And it was a very eye-opening and life-changing experience for them as well to be introduced to the Paralympic movement. The impact of the Games typically begins with large-scale investments in constructing or renovating venues and facilities to be accessible. structures that not only consider the needs of athletes with disabilities, but also consider the mobility needs of spectators and vendors. As a quick example of the size of investment, for Beijing 2022, the Winter Games that are coming in March, the organizing committee has created, through government support, 40 new ice and snow resorts and over 1,000 new ice rinks that are accessible throughout China. The Games' impact is realized also in the legislative changes, such as an increase in the number of fully accessible hotel rooms in a host city, or curb cuts for the first time in a host city, as we did in Sochi in 2014, or accessible transport hubs, which was something back in Atlanta in 96, or inclusive hiring practices. In addition to accessible venues and infrastructure, the Paralympic Games signaled to the host city, and I think to the world, that accessibility can and should be normative. That is, accessible and barrier-free designs can be integrated at the beginning, as Yuval likes to say, at the beginning rather than during renovation or at the end. Whether a project addresses a building or addresses a people management system, our goal is for those projects to be designed with accessibility and inclusivity built in from the start. As another colleague and friend, Ileana Rodriguez, will tell you later today, it's the power of a pencil and an eraser during the design process winning over the power of a jackhammer during a renovation. So I'll come back to the Games in just a minute and talk to you a little bit about Tokyo 2020. But first, I would like to stress that one of the key connections the IPC has with Access Israel, and hopefully many of you, is our desire to have and encourage or enable other entities to have accessibility and inclusion in our DNA. As our dear friend Steve Frost says, diversity is a reality and inclusion is a choice. For us, what this means, at least in part, is that we need to continue working hard to be an inclusive employer and provide a workplace that enables our team members to bring their true selves to work and see their fingerprints on the decisions and outcomes of all of our efforts. Admittedly, we're still not the organization that we want to be and that we need to be in this area, but we're working on it and we're committed to excellence and will continue to make great strides in this direction. And I'm sure our interactions with Yuval and Access Israel will help us move more swiftly in that direction. What this also means is that we need to support our members in meaningful ways so that they too can realize their potential as inclusive organizations. As you can imagine, we have member organizations around the globe, some of whom are incredibly sophisticated and some of whom work in highly resource-constrained areas of the world. In all cases, we strive to help support their efforts to walk the talk. Finally, this also means that we're working to get better about helping shape the narrative of disability. And we have lots of anecdotal evidence of the Games' impact, but we want to get better at providing evidence of return on investment in disability and return on investment in sport for people with a disability, whether that's at the level of the Paralympic Games or at the level of grassroots investment. We want to help ignite a meaningful discourse or reignite or further ignite a meaningful discourse with governments, quasi-governments, foundations, universities, corporations, NGOs that collectively result in greater opportunity and less discrimination for people with a disability. As you guys well know, these efforts often represent heavy lifts. Prejudice and stigma are not easy objects to lift, nor has disability garnered its rightful attention, in our view, in terms of social movements or in terms of funding. And we experience this too in the world of sport. So just to share with you, whereas incredibly important discussions are now finally happening in parts of the world, at least, about the gender pay gap in sports. For example, the Women's World Cup most recently, And we think these are incredibly important discussions to have. The same discussions have not even come to the surface yet in the world of disability sport. And just to give you a sense of where we are, our good partners at the Olympic Committee, they donate to various sport causes around the world. They donate our annual budget every 6 days. So the amount of funds available in able-bodied sport just are completely massive compared to the amount of money in disability sport. All this to say, we have a lot of work yet to do, and we're incredibly grateful to be charged, of course, with the responsibility of carrying out that work. We equally are grateful for communities like the one that you have here today, as we feel we can all do more together than we can do alone. So let me come back briefly to the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games and share 3 aspects of those games with you. As you've all told me, for example, that some of you have been discussing, among other things, the impact of COVID on accessibility and people living with a disability over the last many months. So in terms of the 3 things, firstly, these games for us were historic, as Donnie alluded to just a moment ago. They were historic for several reasons. One, simply just delivering a postponed games. That had never happened in the history of the Paralympics, but it never happened even in the longer history of the Olympic Games. And I can tell you that whereas the organizing committee has 7 years to prepare for games, preparing everything all over again in a matter of 12 months was no small task. Delivering the games during a global pandemic was also another reason. All the different, and I'll talk about this a little bit more specifically in just a second, but all the different COVID countermeasures and safety precautions that we needed to put in place to ensure the safety and success of the athletes that we serve and the many stakeholders that we're helping was just an incredible exercise. And perhaps moving something more important or more close to home, for us, more nations and territories than ever before qualified at least one athlete to participate in these games. The record had always been London 2012. And whereas regrettably, some of these athletes were not in the end able to attend due to COVID restrictions in their respective countries, it was really a testament to our members and to the athletes that more than ever were able to have a qualifying athletic performance for these games. In addition, more nations and territories than ever before won a medal during these games. So you can imagine we are certainly committed to trying to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And one way of knowing how you're doing there, one way is to identify the number of different countries that are actually on the medal stand, so that it's not just an elite few. I think important for all of us too is that for the first time ever, we offered free-to-air broadcasts in Sub-Saharan Africa or across Sub-Saharan Africa. So for the first time ever, a Paralympic Games was shown in a very important region for us in the world, helping to create a new set of heroes for generations of children and their communities, a new sense of possibility, a new sense of hope. And finally, they were historic because we estimate having reached the largest global audience ever of 4.25 billion. The second reason that I wanted to, or the second aspect of the games I wanted to talk to you was simply and very quickly about vaccines. The games were a blessing for many athletes. We know that in the world of disability, people living with disabilities, access to vaccinations was yet another area where we experienced discrimination and another area where we didn't have access to appropriate services. But because it was such an important thing for the Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee, Japan, its government, its local, national government, local government, and all of our member associations, actually the games were a vehicle that allowed our athletes to jump in many countries to the front of the line, the front of the queue, to receive vaccinations for those athletes who were interested. It was not a requirement, but it was a possibility, an opportunity for athletes to be vaccinated if they chose. And so that, we believe was a blessing for many athletes and their families. The third thing I wanted to talk about, and this is where we come to something that I think will be of interest too with regard to COVID, is the isolation facilities. So the organizing committee, with the onset of COVID, needed to plan for a way where an athlete or a stakeholder, a coach, an official, a referee, tested positive during the games. How would we take care of that person and treat that person in a way that would minimize, if not eliminate, the risk of additional infection for other people in the athlete village or in the venues? And again, as these games are awarded to organizing committees, typically 7 years in advance of the opening ceremony, we knew from the very beginning with Tokyo that accessible public facilities was going to present a challenge for this organizing committee and for us. We knew that the sport venues would be accessible, as would various supporting structures, but hotels and transportation systems would be far less so. So Tokyo, and more broadly speaking, Japan, has not received high marks for accessible hotels or transportation, and in some ways, places, public spaces. So during the planning process for these games, we worked very hard with the organizing committee, the municipal and federal governments of Japan, and we're able to change legislation so that from now on, 1% of all hotel rooms will be required to be fully accessible. And whereas 1% may not seem like a high number, it's a far step ahead of what was the case prior to the legislative change. The challenges continued to exist nonetheless, and one such challenge came again with the COVID isolation facilities. So what the organizing committee planned for was when an athlete was sick or was diagnosed with COVID, that they would go to specific hotels within Tokyo where they would be provided 24-hour care from registered nurses and physicians. And that was the plan also on the Paralympic side, except there were only, because many of our stakeholders and teams also rent hotel rooms during the games, the organizing committee was able to only reserve hotels that provided a total of three accessible rooms. So you can imagine, for all the athletes that we serve, particularly those athletes who use wheelchairs, 3 was an incredibly small number. And it was something that we were working with them tremendously hard on in the lead up to the games. Now, something happened just between the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. All through Japan, COVID numbers began to spike. They weren't associated, plenty of studies indicated, weren't associated with the Olympic Games, but they were nonetheless a spike in cases. And what happened was, because only 3 hotel rooms were assigned, were fully accessible, were available for our athletes, the plan of the organizing committee was to send athletes who tested positive, who required an accessible room, to the local hospitals, regardless of the severity of their COVID infection. And there we had several conversations about, look, we're sending kids, perhaps minors with COVID. We're sending people who don't speak Japanese. Are we sending to the hospitals? Are we putting relatively healthy athletes with minor COVID cases in isolation wards with very sick individuals? And what about Wi-Fi? What about being able to connect with the world, with their loved ones, with their coaches and teams? So there were a tremendous amount of energy spent on talking about the inadequate, supply of hotel rooms and the inadequate response of hospital beds. In the end, it was flipped on its head because as COVID cases spiked, there were no hospital beds available to our athletes unless it was life-saving emergency was required. And so all the athletes, unless it was a very severe case of COVID, which luckily we were able to avoid, but were going to be sent to the hotels, regardless of whether the rooms were fully accessible or not. So, and this just happened in the 2 weeks prior to our games. And so in the fairly many sleepless nights leading up to the games, we were working very diligently with the organizing committee to provide portable toilets and wash basins in these hotels for athletes, because there truly was just no other safe place for them to go. And I think that that probably will continue to be a point of discussion and so many lessons learned for organizing committees in the future, particularly if we continue like we are shortly in Beijing, continue to provide games in the context of a pandemic. It was far from ideal, but in the end, the organizers, we think, thousands of volunteers, Japanese media, they understood. They came to understand the importance of accessibility, the importance of inclusion. And we think this legacy, it's far from perfect, but this legacy, we believe, will continue to grow in Japan now, as we saw their response to our games, a much more inclusive society going forward, a society that is much more attentive to mobility needs through inclusive structures and inclusive people management systems. But happy to discuss that in more detail in future opportunities to do so with you. For now, let me just say once more that I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today and to be supporting Access Israel's program here today. I look forward to learning from my fellow presenters and also to working with Access Israel and its network members to change the world. Whereas Parasport and the Paralympic Games, it's not for everyone, and we know that. And it's certainly not the panacea for all the challenges people with a disability face. We know that too. But we stand ready to do our part to pursue excellence in what we do and to forever champion the rights of persons with disabilities. So thank you very much for what you do. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. It's a true pleasure.
Thank you very much, Mike. My mind is already blowing with the opportunities of cooperating in the near and far future. And I have no doubt this is just the beginning. So again, thank you very much. And it definitely sounds like you had your handful. And I'm very happy it succeeded and finished in such a way. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, guys, because I know Pascal, I'm not very easy to give up. So last opportunity, last try. Pascal, can you please share from your 4 Paralympic Games experience? Please, let's try to hear you.
So now you hear me, right? No, I don't see you.
No, not working.
Not working.
Not working.
Maybe
Sorry for all of us.
Michal,
Yeah.
ask her to close the window behind her, please.
Close the window?
לסגור את החלון מאחוריה. מה ששומעים זה הרוח מאחוריה.
Okay, close the window behind you and let's see if that works.
Right. I don't think so, but let's do it.
Because we hear her. אנחנו שומעים אותה, אבל החלון פתוח. תנסי
Let's try. Pascal, let's try now.
Can you hear me better now?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of us. Pascal, we'll promise. We owe our amazing audiences a 10-minute presentation by you in the future. Thank you.
It's
very
the
much
output volume on her window settings that's not loud enough. That's the only problem. So if somebody can help her to maybe just change the settings. The output volume for her microphone is on very low. That's what it sounds like.
Your microphone setting in Zoom is very low. Okay, we'll try to help you.
Another suggestion is that you're not using the speaker.
She's not using the speaker.
Okay, we will try to see if we can help her from afar. And I'm very happy to move on to our next speaker. And let me hope that I'm saying the name correctly. Shinji Nakamahe. He is the Deputy Senior Director of the Paralympic Games Integration Office in Tokyo. And today he will share with us his work from the Tokyo Paralympic Games and his unique perspective of advancing accessibility in one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. Please.
Thank you, Michal.
I am Shinji Nakamae of Paralympic Games Integration Office of Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee. Maybe I look like an Asian, typical Asian, and wearing the jacket and white shirt. I usually wear some running gear at time of the day, but this is a special day with the accessibility Israel. And I thank President Yuval and Michal and also the Embassy of Israel in Japan to reach me out for this opportunity. And I also want to congratulate the NPC Israel for coming all the way to Tokyo for our games and the great performance by your athlete and team, including the 3 guide dogs. And I also thank to IPC colleagues. And I have Iliana and Craig after me. I hope they will be covering a lot, which I cannot cover. And thank for the mic to be very comprehensive review of our games and the challenges. I do not hide that we do have a lot of the issues in the games time, particularly from the lack of the resources and the lack of the understanding still for the importance of the accessibility, particularly for our games. But today I am happy to speak about the accessibility in our games. It was the year 2014, the organizing committee is established, and also the government of Japan ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Prior to this ratification, the government first worked for the revision of the existing Basic Act for the person with disability, which was revised in 2011. Then the Act for Eliminating the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability was established in 2013. Therefore, our games provided a good opportunity for the accessibility-related laws and regulations to be reviewed for the future. Also, it is important to note that Japan is one of the leading countries in terms of having a highly Asian society. So there is a great need for us to prepare for the more accessible environment. I would like to touch upon the organization structure of who we worked on accessibility in Tokyo 2020. We advocate unity in diversity as one of our 3 core concepts of our games vision. In order to make sure that everyone in the organizing committee shares the same understanding of this concept, then to deliver the games as accessible, as inclusive as possible, the Paralympic Games integration function was created in April 2014. And we work and report directly to our CEO, and PGI function started and remains a small unit, about 10 persons, to validate the whole games for the Paralympic integration and accessibility. Our first task as PGI was to make the structure for the Paralympic Games planning, accessibility guidelines, and to educate the entire organizing committee for these items. Particularly to develop the games accessibility guideline were a very heavy task, but in the end, one of the greatest achievements in our games. In 2014, we carefully start the comparison of the existing laws and regulations of Japan and the host city with the IPC accessibility guide. This is very important for the necessary items preparation for the games time service. And then to discuss the develop the guidelines for the games, we established the Accessibility Council in November 14, 2014. Members of this council were invited very widely. Many officers from the government of relevant ministries and sections, those from the host city, representatives from more than 10 disability groups in Japan and other accessibility needs, representatives from the various business industries, from the transport, the hotels and service sectors, to discuss so many times in the council to develop and create the Tokyo 2020 accessibility guidelines, which was approved by IPC in the early 2017. While the accessibility guidelines serves for the games type need, discussion was hot in the council on the gaps between IPC standards and the domestic standards, and which one should be adopted in our guideline for what reasons. While we try to adopt quite many of the items in the IPC guide, sometimes we decided to use our domestic standard. One example is the height of the handrails in the spectating area in the stadium. Most of the spectators are assumed as Japanese. Unfortunately, we have no spectators in our games because of COVID. This is decided to see how best we will be using the stadium in the future. This process of having thorough discussion, especially with disability groups, was beneficial for the organizing committee for our future discussion with Paralympic stakeholders for the games operation planning. As Danny little bit provided us with a review of the 1964 games, I can say that games at that time was something prepared and provided from the able-bodied society. But for the games we have here in 2020 or 21, this is our collaboration between all the people, regardless of the disability of any accessibility aspect. We are very successful to have some fair Paralympic or disability group representation throughout our planning. And also, we have a good allocation of our staff, person with different types of disabilities in our organizing committee, and so that everyone come up with some accessibility episode in their daily life. Paralympians in our athlete committee was very active, and we had great involvement of also NPC Japan National Federation, as well as those of the IPC international federations, to emphasize the importance of accessibility in the operational planning to much detail. For accessibility in the games information and service, I would like to speak two examples. Firstly, our technology service made a great job for the web accessibility improvement. They are very fast established and announced the web accessibility policy. And also regarding the games without information, our technology service solved most of these issues which existed in the past and left unsolved. And second item is the staff training. The word omotenashi, the Japanese type of hospitality, became known through the games. But in the early phase, quite many of our organizing committee colleagues confessed to me that they do not know what to do, what to say to a person with disabilities. Therefore, my function worked very hard with our people management function to develop very basic educational material to how to assist persons with different types of impairments. These materials are utilized for our staff who are volunteer training, and also utilized by our contractor or the partners to develop their own material.
1 minute, please. Thank you.
Through this process, I am confident we secure the games accessibility to provide the safe and comfortable stay as much as possible, and so that the participant can fully enjoy the stay in Tokyo. The city of Tokyo in Japan continued to be more accessible after the games. As Mike said, the government and the local government revised the many laws to be more accessible. These changes will be continuing with activity plans and targeted goals. So I hope you can come to Tokyo and experience by yourself when the restriction by the COVID-19 is gone. And thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I loved what you said, that in Danny Wagner's Olympics, it was consulting and led by able bodies, and now it's a corporation and a team effort, and that's great. Thank you very much, and we will go to our next speaker. Ileana Rodriguez is the principal at iDesign Access and an international architectural design consultant for major infrastructure projects focusing on inclusive design. And she is the accessibility consultant for the IPC. As a former Paralympic swimmer herself, it will be very interesting to hear from her. So please, Ileana, I want to hear you.
Thank you so much. I don't know, can you guys hear me well?
We hear you perfect. The only thing is we have such amazing speakers. We can try to be on time. Thank you.
I will be on time. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Ileana Rodriguez. I'm super happy to be here and very honored to be joining you guys and joining a lot of the people that I had the chance to work with in the past and in future games as well. Since we have not only Tokyo, but we have Paris. I see that we have some people from Chile as well. So these are all people that I have the pleasure to work with. I will do a very quick description of myself. I have brown hair, light skin, and I'm wearing some pearls today, like every day I do, and with a black shirt. I will share my screen because my background is an architect. I don't think that architects can do presentations without showing some sort of drawing or images. So to keep myself on track, also this is very useful. So I will start my presentation. I have the opportunity to be the design consultant for the accessibility consultant, for the Tokyo Paralympic Games. I started working with Shinji from the IPC side, but with the Shinji's team in late 2017, the beginning of 2018, where we started conversations around the Tokyo Games. But the reason why I started doing this type of work is precisely because of the number of people that we have, and we all know this in this conversation, around the world with the need of accessibility. And I always love to show this map because it shows really the impact of what we do at Games have. And we have a map on the left side of my screen that is blue, showing the North and South American continents being covered in blue, representing the number of people that we have around the world with disabilities. But in reality, a person with a disability affects 3 times this number, meaning that we have almost 3 more continents that would be covered in an image that I'm showing on the right side that is orange. And it shows all the countries that are really affected in terms of numbers of people that are affected by disability today. So why are we so hesitant every time we come with this conversation to speak to organizing committees, with architects, with designers? Why are we so hesitant when there's so many people that are affected by this? So they don't realize that besides doing the right thing, also it means money. So I think is the time to start turning the conversation as an opportunity rather than as a burden for many of these cities. So for the past few years that I've been doing this, my first conversations with the architects, my first conversation with the designers or the organizing committee is, who are you working for? Who are your clients? When I went to architecture school, the first thing they told me was that, you know, put a scale person in your model and you will learn from that. And I'm like, yeah, but scales are different, sizes are different, people are different. I remember in my school, all the scale models were 6 foot tall, super handsome, or very pretty girls. It was never a person in a wheelchair. It was never a person with an amputated leg or a person who was visually impaired. So I started doing a study when I was in school, and I have continued developing who are really our clients. Is it just these people, or is it just people who are diverse, people that are different? So that's the reason why I decided to take onto this opportunity and start working with the Paralympics on this regard, where we have to look at our users first, then that would dictate our design approach, and at the end, hopefully, you would end up with a seamless accessibility. But the reality is that we have a lot of challenges, because when we arrive, we have the problem of location, we have the problem of a culture, we have a problem of how people really interpret this accessibility word. And as we heard before from the wonderful story of Dan, this is, it's history, right? We've been dealing with this for many, 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 many years, and we have made amazing progress around the world, but there's so much work to still be done. And one of the biggest problems we have is the culture. Why? Because this is like a confrontation to them sometimes, to see the reality that this is a problem and this is a big challenge that we need to work with. And the environment of the country is also a huge challenge as well, because the culture dictates a lot of what's happening there too. So we come as the IPC with our international organization manual, but the country itself has its own manual. So how do we make those two talk to each other? It's very tough. And it's very tough, not necessarily in the organizing committee, but actually accessing those designers who are the decision makers. And the difference can be huge, because usually manuals in countries, laws and regulations are thinking of 5% of the population, 10% of the population who has an impairment. But in reality is that at the games time, you can have 70% of the people who would be using these venues at any given time. Think of the village. 50% of the people who has a disability. So that changes already how you're going to think about accessibility. It's not you need to provide inclusion, not just access for people. Because at any given point, you're going to find people who are going to need a service, and this person is going to have a disability. And it's a change in mind, because having 5 or 10% doesn't mean that you don't have to do that as well. You have to provide the same level of service and the same level of opportunities. So the conversation with the designers comes to a process. If we're able to reach the designers, which is sometimes a challenge with the organizing committees, is that we look at it and say, listen, even from the earliest phases of design, it's not about the codes, it's not about the regulation, it's about being inclusive. Every time you're going to make a decision, you have to think who your users are. And this is how we try to approach it every time. So how does that impact the games? Well, it's huge, because in games time, as I said before, the numbers can go so high in terms of people that need accessibility that it's very challenging to make those changes, to make everything accessible, to make everything inclusive in the 2 weeks period of transition that we have between Olympic and Paralympic Games. So what we have done in the past is, it's been a slower process. Sometimes it hasn't been allowed by, and I showed this graph as a reference. Please don't take the numbers by heart. But the transition was due to the fact that we had worked from like the past 3 years previous to the games on trying to work out with the designers. There was a lot of tensions, there was a lot of, yes, we're going to make it, no, we're not going to make it. But at the end of the day, many of the big issues were resolved prior to the games. And we're hoping that for Paris, that decreases a lot based on the involvement that we've been able to have from even a very, very much earlier stage than even Tokyo, where we've been able to even do some workshops with the designers and start working with the architects and the big decision makers for Paris. And Lidovine, feel free to correct me on this one after when you come to speak. But I think that the impact is huge. Not only we provide more inclusive city, but hopefully we're going to provide more jobs. We're going to provide more opportunity for everyone. So in Tokyo, one of the big, when you think of a stadium this size, this is the legacy that the games are leaving. But the legacy in terms of accessibility looks more like this. Now you have a venue that allows for people to sit at different tiers, enjoy in the future what you're going to provide in that stadium, and even have other Paralympic events or other events for people with disabilities, because you have a field of play, a back of house, everything that supports an event for people who have any kind of disabilities, and is a more inclusive space. In terms of infrastructure, we have to also think that we don't want to leave problems for the city, the least amount of problems, if you want to call it. And in this case, for example, is a temporary structure that had to be built for the media to be able to have their space during games time. But for the Olympics, they didn't need this space to be fully accessible. But for the Paralympic Games, it could be turned into a space that was accessible and provided better seating and more opportunities for people to sit there. So what they did was to build a temporary ramp that turned a completely non-accessible space into a new space that would be used in a different way during Paralympic Games. So these are the type of things that we try to look as opportunities in terms of good transition from one game to the next. And then you have venues that, of course, are historical venues. They're older venues that would be improved for the games. We have to be mindful. You cannot just come and remove a column because the roof is going to fall on top of you, right? So we have to be mindful on the way that we make decisions as well. And in this venue, for example, some seats were added and some seats will remain for the future in this older venue. But some other events were created temporary as accessible seating, most likely on an event not as big as the Paralympic Games will not be necessary to have this many accessible seating. So in that case, it's safe to remove some of the accessible seats, but nonetheless, the venue will stay with accessible seating for the future. The village is probably one of the hardest because you have the highest number of people with a disability staying in one single place, but how do you really make every single room accessible? This is not real in many instances. So we learned a lot from the Tokyo Games as IPC, and we were working on developing the accessibility guide and making some, well, not developing, I'm sorry, to improve the accessibility guide that we had from before, which had great proposals on things on how to make certain things work during the games, and we wanted to make some improvement to that accessibility guide. And in that sense, the village came very important to us because it allowed to describe a new way of kind of creating accessible rooms as we needed it, but also not limiting ourselves to only have accessible room, but have it what we call friendly. And in terms of being a little more flexible in terms of the services that you provide, but still will allow a person with certain mobility needs to use these bathrooms without being completely accessible. That creates a lot of problems for the developers and for the future of these buildings in terms of constructability, costs, and many other things. So I wanted to show you quickly what this looked like in terms, you can see a similar layout, the differences in the circulation and how do you reduce the space and you can still use these different bathrooms. And one of the greatest things about the games is the fact that you not only impact a village, you not only impact a venue, but you impact the city itself. When you see athletes going in the city, unfortunately in Tokyo we didn't have that opportunity due to COVID, but I have seen it in other games, in games where I was an athlete in London. You could see how having the athletes out there and having people taking part of the city life really changed perspectives. And the games have the opportunity to really transform parts of the transportation system, products, services, and this is a great opportunity also for myself and for what we do, because we learn what the city is offering and how can we make it better and see if it's going to work during games time. So for Paris, I put here a few points, and I love the picture that I have on the right-hand side because it shows how much, and Mike touched on this, and I'm sure Craig is going to touch on this when he speaks. We're having so many athletes, retired athletes, being involved in media, and they're coming back to the games and supporting the games in different ways. And this is something that has changed and progressed from game to game. And now we can even see that in the mixed zone during games time, now you have the proper height for people to be able to speak to the journalist. I remember in London that this was not the case in some of the areas for the mixed zone. I remember for myself being an athlete and having like very high bars for me to be able to speak with the journalist. So you can already see a huge progress from one game to the next, and I hope that this continues along next games. So now with Paris, we are working on being more diligent on speaking to the designers and the architects in the very early stages, and the organizing committee is doing a very good job on trying to keep that conversation going. There are open conversations with the decision makers, accessibility workshop, moving towards a more inclusive environment. Even though Paris is an older city and has many challenges as well, I think the intention and the willingness to move into a more inclusive environment, we hope that continues and is there throughout the entire process. And understand accessibility as an opportunity for a positive impact. I think we need to change the conversation. Accessibility cannot be a burden, it should be an opportunity. And this will leave a very strong event legacy for sure. So I leave you with this slide, the social impact of a designer and the games. I have a number of people with disabilities in emojis, plus the culture and environment equals an accessibility, equals accessibility. I think as designers and as the games, we can definitely change the culture, we can change the environment, plus the people with disabilities can help to create a more accessible space. So thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be with you guys here, and I hope I stayed on time.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Unshare your screen. Perfect. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. And now we're off to our next speaker. And again, I apologize. I'm running because we have zero place to spare. So our next speaker, Shapal Kasnabis, and I apologize for not pronouncing maybe correctly. He is from the WHO. I can tell you that we have been speaking for the last several months, looking for opportunities to include the WHO in our webinars. Amazing stuff is happening there, and I'm very happy we found the opportunity to share today. Shapal is the head of the Access to Assistive Technology and Medical Devices Unit in the World Health Organization, and he is a prosthetic and orthotics designer and engineer, and founded Mobility India, Bangalore, to enable, empower, and include with disability people with disabilities everywhere. Thank you. Shapal, you're here. Perfect. Just unmute yourself.
So
great.
I think everyone can hear.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, Nicole. So everybody can see my slide. I'll talk about Paralympic Games, participation and achievement past, present, and future.
There is no slide. There is your mail open.
Yeah, the email is open and not the, I think we saw the slides and then it moved away.
Sorry.
Just do unshare and then share again with the new slides.
The whole thing has disappeared somehow.
If you do unshare.
1 second, let me.
Thank you. Everybody heard me at the beginning saying there's always things going wrong, and still, big smile. Interesting and really fascinating. And I invite people while we're waiting, there's great comments and great introductions in the chat. So that's also something you should not miss. Shapal, you want us to put the, do the here. Perfect. We can see it now. Thank you.
Can you see it? My sincere apology.
Yes, thank you.
And so it is we have a 80 and I'm an old man from India and with a white shirt and blazer, blue blazer. And I'll try to explain my slides as much as I can. And we strongly promote AT, access to assistive technology. We feel is the first step for any next steps. So Paralympics and assistive technology, I think it goes hand in hand, is made for each other, and it's a win-win combination. And because it's focused more on ability than disability, what people can do with their assistive products, with their power to. So it's a very positive image of disability. It also reinforces human rights, rights to participate, rights to sports, rights to be included, rights to perform. And every Paralympics create greater awareness about the advancement and need of assistive products. As I said, it creates improved opportunities, participation, competition, and inclusion, and better technology. On the slides on the next is the all Autobot advanced prostheses, orthoses, different devices, which can really assist the Paralympians to perform at the highest level. But there is also challenges, and we see that participation from low middle income countries are at lower levels and achieve fewer medals than high income countries because they don't have access to the same quality of devices. These differences are particularly marked in events that have a high cost of participation or need high-end, high-quality assistive products. So you can compare the trikes used by the people of the high-income countries and on the low-income countries. The contrast is obvious, and that creates a major hurdles for low middle-income countries athletes to perform better. So what we say that as technology improves, the gap widens. That's the irony of the technological advancement. On one hand, we see these blades, modern blades, and all advanced trikes, wheelchairs. But at the same time, we see in the low-income countries, or even low middle-income countries, people are still using those old orthoses, prostheses. And you cannot really compete at the highest level with those devices. So the contrast is very obvious. And we need to do something to mitigate this gap between North and South. There's a huge gap. And you will see the reaction of this. It's also in the participation. If you look at the participation, it's increasing, but we also see there's a huge gender gap. There are more female than female. Whether it is high income countries, upper middle income, lower middle income, or low income, there is one unique standard, is that 30%, nearly 30% women than men, and 70% men. So economy doesn't change the gender influence, which we are a bit shocked to learn. So 80 divide between South and North, global South and North, is huge. And Paralympics has to really see that how we can gradually mitigate this divide. For example, in the past, between South and North, I can give you an example. Success is often related to access to high quality assistive technology. For example, in 2016 in Rio, the US Paralympic team racing wheelchairs were custom designed by BMW, whereas the Democratic Republic of Congo's teams wheelchairs were donated by Humanity and Inclusion. So one side, companies like BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, they're designing these kind of advanced bikes or trikes. And on the other hand, you have this kind of a donation or support free to these athletes. It's like you're fighting, going to the war with your bayonets against the cannons, like that. Opportunity plus access to assistive technology is, we call it success. If you have to have, and it will become obvious in my next presentation. So we have studied and published this article. We wanted to publish this during the Paralympics, but it took some time. So we have really gone through the participation level, gender level, income level, assistive technology, and we saw the difference and the contrast within the Paralympics. So if any of you want to know or read this article, drop a mail to us so we can share it with you, and also the link is here. So what we learned, that high-income countries, higher participation, middle-income countries, upper middle income more than the lower middle income. So it has a direct influence with the economics. Higher economy, the more participation. And in COVID, we saw a dip. So up to 2016, the curve was growing upwards. But in 2021, we saw a little bit dip. But that dip is more in the high-income countries than the low-middle-income countries. But we hope that dip will be able to overcome in next Paralympics. So the male and female participation, as we said, is always much lower. So we have to really ensure that how we can ensure better gender balance in forthcoming Paralympics. So it becomes a more level playing field. So I always say the Paralympic medal table, they actually present the snapshot of the global 80 scenario. If you take China out, most of this, Great Britain, US, Korea, Netherlands, Ukraine, Brazil, Australia, Italy, surprisingly Azerbaijan, they are the major medal winners. And if you look at them, this table tells you a lot of stories. And though China is not a high-income country, but they win maximum medal. So Chinese have the 3 basic ingredients which they made it right: political will, access to high-quality products, and third is the training facilities, and the sports is a priority. So whatever the equipment the athletes from UK, US, high-income countries use, actually most of those are made in China. So China has the same quality of devices. So as a result, they can perform at par, if not better, with the high-income countries. And the graph shows that nearly 50% of the medals actually always gone to high-income countries, and then nearly 40% to upper middle income countries. But if you take the Brazil and China out, this graph will show pathetic. So there's a lot to be done to ensure that we have a more even or more equitable Paralympics. So in 2020 Tokyo Paralympics, if you see especially the wheelchair tennis, wheelchair rugby, there's no sign of any developing countries. I have been told out of nearly 100 medals in wheelchair tennis of last so many years, 99% medal, 99 medals went to the high-income countries. So how we can bring a greater balance? How can we make the sports more equitable? How can we ensure that everybody has the right to participate? So high-income countries always dominated wheelchair-related sports. Low-income countries rarely participating and never winning. That's the truth. And the data can show you that. So I was going from Paralympics to Paralympics. So in Rio 2016, I was really challenging myself and hitting my head against the wall. Why such a low participation and why such an imbalance in this world? So I was spending a lot of time behind the Autobot workshop. And I was speaking with these many Paralympians. And for them, Paralympics is the only opportunity even to repair their orthosis or prosthesis. They don't have these facilities even in countries, in many countries. So unless and until we have such facilities within the countries, we cannot have a equitable Paralympics. So what I said in Rio, I have to really work with IPC to make a MOU, because WHO has a MOU with FIFA, WHO has a MOU with IOC. Why not WHO should have a MOU with IPC? So my good friend Craig and we discussed a lot. We argued a lot, and ultimately we got a MOU done, where one of the key areas is to improve access to high quality assistive technology and also to mitigate the gap between global south and global north. And our DG was very kind to give the opening speech to support the Paralympics and saying that we have to work together to mitigate this gap. And here the chief of DG, WHO and chief of IPC, they're signing the MOU, And now we'll work towards a 5-year action plan to see that how we can operationalize this MOU. So I come to present, these are all past. Present just last week, WHO, FIFA, and Qatar ministry, government, signed a 3-year joint project to make 2020 World Cup healthy and creating a legacy for sport and health. So if that is possible, why can't we, here is in the image, WHO DG and Minister of Qatar signing the MOU. So there will be big investment to ensure forthcoming FIFA World Cup becomes a hub to spread the message of healthy and safe.
Shapal, if you can have one more minute, thank you.
How many?
One more, thank you.
Okay. So what we are saying that future should be something similar. WHO, IOC, IPC, France. Together, we should do something in Paris to ensure that there is a greater promotion and greater participation. So also in the future, we have to see that how we can put the graph upwards, especially low, middle, upper income countries, and obviously high income countries. So we need to change this trajectory, and that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Very, very interesting. And I have no doubt, I think there's some comments in the chat, and I have no doubt there will be more. And I'm inviting all our speakers to join the website with your details to enable direct contact, direct questions. Thank you very much, Shapal. And this is, again, just the beginning. We'll have more cooperations. Our next speaker is very connected to what Shapal said, and that is Peter Franzel, the head of global events and exhibitions and sports at Autobot. I must say that I was impressed tremendously when I visited the Autobot Center in Berlin, and I am very, very eager to hear what you are presenting today. Shapal, if you can just unshare your screen, and then we're ready for our next speaker.
Thank you. I hope my audio is on. You can hear me?
Yes, it is. Great. We're just waiting for Shapal to, can you okay, great. Yes, we can hear you.
So thanks for having me here. It was so amazing what I heard and learned until now, and I'm very happy to also explain a little bit what Autobot is doing at the Games. Autobot is a company founded in 1919 in Berlin, right after World War I, where the demand of prostheses was very high. So from this day on, Mr. Autobot started to manufacture, to produce prostheses in an industrial way. Ever since then, we take care about the mobility of persons with disabilities. With the Paralympic Games, we are since 1988, since the Games in Seoul, where 4 technicians from Autobot went there to see if they can help, if they can provide some service to the athletes. And we ended up in Tokyo, where we finished 2,083 repairs overall. And as Shapal was mentioned, this is sometimes the only chance that people can go to their competition, can really compete if we take care on their equipment. To give you a little bit glimpse how this looks like, I have prepared a short video for you. And I'm now trying to start this video.
Just make sure when you're sharing to enable the sound.
Yes, enable the sound, sharing. And now you can see my screen, yes?
Not yet. Let's do. Perfect.
Hello, warm welcome to the Autobot Repair Service Center here at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games. We are here in the residential area in the village, Paralympic Village, where our repair service is located. And I take you now through a tour. Please, let's go. We have two of those fittings rooms. Here we can have a more detailed look to the prosthesis of horses. We have a bit more privacy. And we also have machines like the 3D laser posture, where we really can find out how the balance on the athlete is on the prosthesis, and this is very good to know more about the use of the prosthesis for the athlete. So here at our reception desk, Katja and Fabienne are at the moment on duty. We check in all the data from the athletes, so they register with the accreditation pass, and we link all the repair data with the athletes, so we have a very good statistics for future games and also to document what's happened at the current games. What you see here is the 3D printer. First time ever at Paralympic Games we introduce 3D printing. We have a scanner, we can do scans of body parts, and then we can 3D print smaller parts. Now we go to the workshop. Here is the place where all the magic happens. We have a 705 square meter orthopedic workshop. Over there you just see our 4 work units, work benches, where all the repairs are carried out. Annika at the moment, she is doing a repair or a new sole on a blade. This is running blade from carbon fiber, and here you see this is the sole with the spikes, and here we can see that this is not so really good glued anymore, because a lot of pressure and a lot of force comes into those units when they do the long jump or they do running, and so she's making a new one from an athlete from the Netherlands. So this is carried out here. Let's have a look at the next area. For example, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, very rough sports. They bang together with their chairs. Sometimes the frames are cracking, and here we can do the welding. He's now cleaning the area, take off the paint. And first, when it's really very clean, then he can start with the welding. So he's polishing off all the colors. Let's go to the next room. Igo, son. Hi. All good? All good. Good. He is working on the socket router. Socket router is a machine where you have a spinning tube here, and you can put different sets of tools on it. And he's now polishing and grinding off a plastic. This is the side panel of a wheelchair. We can cut different types of wood or plastic or metal. Here is another socket router. Here we have a belt sander and also a grinder for metal. Let's go to see the next place. So here we are at our shelf where we have the already finished repairs. Let's go to the storage area. To be prepared for all those jobs, we have 4,400 athletes here in the village, and they all have different types of materials, and they use different types of equipment. In total, we brought 17,000 single spare parts here to Tokyo. For example, some knee joints that are here, or some prosthetic feet. You can find here many liners, different parts are used for prosthetic orthotic work. And for sure, we also need a lot of wheelchair repair equipment. This is stored here. We already carried out 1,100 and plus repairs. At the beginning of our operation, this was full of tires. I was hiding behind the tires. Now you can see our stock is going down, but we will have enough equipment, enough spare parts till the last day. So let's go back to the workshop. So one more thing I like to show you is here the Prosa assembly. As I showed you earlier in our fitting room, we have the 3D laser posture where we can do the measurement on the athlete. And with this data, we can here now align the prosthesis in a very good way. I'm not sure if you can see those laser lines clearly, but we have 3 laser lasers here around, and there we can really adjust the prosthesis per millimeter, and it has a big effect on the gait of the athlete. If you take the knee a little bit more left, a little bit more right, in the front, in the back, this affects the gait, and this is what we can do here, the precise adjustments. For sure we use a lot of screws and nuts and bolts, and also to be prepared here for everything. We have those boxes with thousands of different types of screws and parts and nuts and bolts. So all this is used for the repairs. Here we are with our short tour around in our workshop. I hope it was interesting for you. I hope you enjoyed. You not only can see beautiful sport here at the Paralympics, you also see and understand that there is a service behind what is happening behind the scenes. This job that we do within Autobot is very important for the games. We keep the athletes on their wheels, we keep the athletes on their prosthesis, and they can focus on their sport, and we take care of their equipment.
Wow, wow, wow.
So this was a short video about it, and I just want to give you 2 more seconds from the athletes, what they think about this service. So I will go back to the video.
Equipment.
Hello, my name is Johannes Floss. I'm a German double belows in the amputee and 100-meter and 400-meter sprinter. And the Autobot Service Center inside the Paralympic Village is just a safety feature for us athletes if something breaks right before the competition or while training, so everything can be repaired and fixed before our competition.
Thank you very much to Autobot for giving us the possibility to assist our athletes of the Italian team. It is very important to have the possibility to have access to your facility here, which speeds up our work and eases the life of the athletes and allow them to compete to the best.
Hello, I'm extremely happy that Autobot is here. It gives me a feeling of safety. If something happens, that I know they'll help me and they'll support me.
Hi, I'm Anna and I'm from New Zealand, and I just want to say a huge thank you to Autobot for helping everybody out during the Tokyo Paralympics. They helped me lengthen my blade so it was the right height for my hips and running on. And they were also generous enough to give me another blade to try. So yeah, really grateful for that, and a huge thank you to everyone here. They've all been so lovely and welcoming.
Hi, my name is Ezra Freck. I'm a track and field Paralympian for Team USA. I came here, got a tour of the beautiful Autobot Repair Center. I have to say, this is extremely important to the Paralympic Games. The Paralympic Games, there's lots of technology, lots of innovation, lots of prosthesis and wheelchairs, and even myself would have not been able to compete without the Autobot Repair Tent here in Tokyo. So extremely crucial, extremely important, and it's the reason that so many of these athletes are able to compete despite maybe the technology or mechanical issues. So thank you to Autobot. This is a beautiful repair tent, and I wouldn't be able to compete without you guys, so this is 100% necessary.
So this was a short introduction into our operations at the Games, and as mentioned before, we did this since 1988. And we signed contract with the IPC to continue until at least at 2032, until the Brisbane Games.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I can tell you that here the staff at Access Israel is calling your job a dream job, and they wish they were there with you. So next Paralympic Games, you have volunteers from our side.
Thank you
very much for sharing. Now we will rush into our next thing, and I am very, very happy and honored to introduce our panel, a panel of Paralympians. We are being led by Moran Samuel. Moran is, first of all, a friend and an inspiration. She's an Israeli medalist and world champion in rowing. She is also a board member of Access Israel. We are very proud to have her. With her, we will have Amanda Dennis, gold ball medalist from the USA, and Husana Kukawanda. I hope I'm pronouncing the name good. She is the youngest swimmer in the Tokyo Games at the age of 14. And as we were told by some, a future medalist. And she is, of course, from Uganda. The three will share their current expressions and feelings from point of view from different perspectives from the latest games. Moran, on to you.
So thank you, Michal. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for...
We heard you. And now you froze. 1 second. Let's make sure that Husana, can we? Moran, yeah, we hear you now, Moran. We hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for introducing us, Michal. And I just want to start, before we go to all the accessibility issues, I want to start with the warm-up questions to maybe let everybody knows us a little better. So Husna, if I can start with you, I know you were very, very young when you first jumped into the pool, but can you share one of your first memories from the pool? How did it feel? So we get to know you a little bit better.
On my first day at the Paralympic Games, it was nighttime, and the next day I kind of took a nap, so I went there in the evening the next day. My first memory was thinking in my head that, oh my God, it looks so much bigger than it does on TV. Because I was seeing it in the Olympics on TV, and it looked, like that. But when I got to actually see it, it looked much bigger and kind of scared me, but it also kind of made me feel like I have reached to this point. There's nothing that's going to stop me from doing it. So yeah, that was my first memory. Just thinking.
And if I take you back in time to when you were a child, and maybe one of your first memories from the swimming pool as a small child, just starting with parasport.
I started swimming when I was 3 years old, but I can only remember something from when I was 4. The rest are just stories. There's one time when we were in the shallow end, and I just tasked myself to slowly walk towards the deep end. I almost drowned, but surprisingly I didn't. I found a way of swimming back to the surface, and that kind of showed me that it's a dangerous sport, but I know that I can do it.
Perfect. 1 second. I think Moran has some problem with here, Moran, please.
So I actually, I will never forget entering my first wheelchair basketball session. It was about 3 years after my spinal stroke. And when I got into the court, I just fell in love again, in my first love, because I played basketball all my life before my injury. And it was as romantic you can imagine, with the slow motion and music in the background and butterflies all over my chest. And for me, that was maybe the first time that I felt this is where I belong. So Amanda, how is it all started for you?
Yeah, so thanks for having me today first. So I started goalball when I was 7. I actually went to a sport education camp. Reluctantly, I wasn't really looking to play any sports because I had previous experience with soccer. My older brother played soccer and I wanted to be like him. And I got out on the field and I didn't see anything. And I didn't really know why. And I kind of told my parents I never wanted to play again. And so they invited me to a sport education camp from a Center for the Visually Impaired in Atlanta and the Paralympic legacy left behind by the 1996 games in Atlanta from Blaze Sports. And I was able to learn about all the Paralympic sports, try all of them from Paralympians who had competed in Athens or who competed in past games and showed us our medals and shared their stories. And goalball was one of the sports that I'd never heard of, but I loved it instantly when I tried it because everybody was on an equal playing field. There was nothing stopping you from being as good as you wanted. And it was more of something, for me, my brother had soccer and then I had goalball, and that was really cool. So I continued and made a lot of friends and found like-minded peers who kind of went through the same journeys as I have been through as a visually impaired person, and it was great. So
thank you so much. And I will continue with you, Amanda, because as me, you have a very long perspective of the games. But did anything surprise you in terms of accessibility in the Tokyo Games? And later, Husna, what did you think about the accessibility during the games? This was your first experience. How were you surprised? So Amanda, you go first.
Sure. So I've been to 3 games so far. Tokyo is my 3rd. And I think every games, the accessibility has gotten better. I believe in London, there wasn't a lot of blind trails around the village. And for me, I don't need them during the day, but I do need them at night. And though there was like some lack in blind trails kind of in the village at night, they would just stop somewhere and then you would be like, okay, where do I go? Because there's nowhere. It's a step forward to have them because we haven't had a lot in previous games. On the other side, you know, there was also some lack in accessibility in the cafeteria for me as a visually impaired person, because before I went there, I was told, yeah, you'll know what food is going to be offered in, you know, during the day, though there will be an app or something put up. And we actually just came from Lima from the Pan American Games, and they had braille menus and large print menus in front of every station. So you knew this is what this station has. And always in the cafeteria, you know, I like being independent by myself, but unfortunately it was not an area that I could be because there wasn't any sort of braille menus or large print menus. You literally had to go up to every station and maybe have a sighted peer or a staff member tell you this is what's at this station instead. But otherwise, I thought the cafeteria was pretty accessible. And then in terms of the village was very accessible. It was really nice to see.
Husna, did anything surprise you during the games, accessibility-wise?
Yes, because in Uganda, there isn't, you know, transport for people who have wheelchairs or, you know, buildings that access wheelchairs. So seeing that kind of, you know, cooperation with people in wheelchairs, people who are, you know, people who are blind, having those trails, just, it's really, really amazing. But in the cafeteria, I really agree, because I also had to, you know, struggle holding the tray, and there weren't so many helpers, you know, due to COVID. So there wasn't much help around, even though some of the helpers couldn't speak English. So that was a challenge. But overall, my experience there was just amazing, and I really look forward to many more Paralympic Games.
Great, thank you so much. So most people think of accessibility in terms of the physical aspects, like having ramps or marked sidewalks. What kind of impact the Paralympic Games have on the broader aspect of accessibility? Do you see how it influences people who are new to parasport and want to start? And do you see how it influences non-para athletes? And
so for me, I actually see that during one thing that was really cool for me heading out from London was they had a kind of a term or expression that led the games that was Inspire a Generation. And you saw that the UK had a really small goalball program before that. And then they have huge goalball program now, like even bigger than what we have in the US, because there are so many people who are inspired by the Paralympic Games to get started with Paralympic sports. You see it on TV. You see some really cool people that have maybe the same disability as you or who you can relate to. And then you say, oh my gosh, I could try that. I could be just like them. And I think in terms of, you know, leaving a legacy behind or getting younger generations to come in, the Paralympics is really great for that. And then on the flip side of that as well, the Paralympics leave something behind for the country. So for the citizens who live there, you know, people kind of understand disability a little bit more. They may see disability as somebody who can't do anything for themselves, who don't really contribute a lot to society. And then all of a sudden the Paralympic Games come and people are motivated, they're inspired. There's so much left behind by the Paralympics that people understand disability after the Paralympic Games so much better than before. And I think that's how the Paralympics kind of leaves its legacy behind in each nation as the games continue to happen.
Husna, can you relate to that? Do you feel the same?
Yes, I really do, because in Uganda, no one hasn't represented Uganda in power swimming in over 21 years.
Wow.
And me being first in over 21 years kind of made me feel like I don't want this to happen again. I want to leave a legacy behind, or, I don't want something like that to happen again. So when I came back to Uganda, I just talked to people. I'll be some days from now or some years from now, I'll be talking to different kids with disabilities, going to the schools with people who are also not disabled, so that, kids with disabilities are accepted as normal kids in, normal people's schools. So I agree with everything she said. You go to places, you meet people with exact disabilities that you have or similar, and seeing how they are achieved everything that they have, how they have reached, how far they have reached, all the experience that they've had, makes you also want to be exactly like them. Like, I've seen power swimmers with world records and, huge representation in their countries, and they're seen as normal people in their countries. They are respected, and in Uganda, people with disabilities don't get the same respect. I would really love to fight that, and I look forward to just, keep fighting for the rights of people with disabilities and promote and fight for inclusion in Uganda.
So you actually already answered my next question, because as you all mentioned, the sport can make change. Sport is like a microcosmos of society, and when we can achieve big things through sport, we can reflect it on other parts of our society. Part of what I feel I can do is how I joined Access Israel, also in the past in activities we did around Israel, and now looking into our role as athletes. I know you work also in the business world and you have a lot of experience there. How do you see our role as athletes to promote accessibility through our success in sport? I think Husna just answered that, but I would love to hear you also.
Sure. So I think that athletes bring a lot of things to the business world. And in the US, we have different career programs for athletes to enter so that they can also leave their impact behind on different businesses. An example for me was working at the Coca-Cola company. They have never had a Paralympic athlete previously. And I worked actually prior to the Rio Paralympic Games with Coca-Cola on their marketing and activation. So I was also able to give a perspective from somebody who is visually impaired, somebody who, is fitting from what they're offering at the games. And I think that also gave them kind of a perspective into what kind of disabilities can benefit from what they're offering at the games. And that also turned into how they can make their workplace more accessible, how they can kind of learn from team build better. And it just, it brought different things into perspective, even in our office environment. For me, it was, Coca-Cola works especially with the Special Olympics, but they didn't know a lot about the Paralympics before, because each sector in the countries that they're doing, say Rio, they only worked with Rio Coke and not with the global Coca-Cola company. And so each sector was kind of touched a little bit by what they can learn from us. And I think that that's really important, especially moving into business, because in the US, especially, disabled people aren't being hired because people don't think that they can do a lot. And then you show up and, you have a lot of accolades and you have a lot of medals and a lot to offer businesses, and you change their entire perspective around. And I think that that's really important. And the Paralympics are doing their part in showing that as they're moving towards a more inclusive environment for everybody.
Thank you so much. So just to close with something that will maybe inspire others, or maybe with some emotions about the Paralympic Games, I would like both of you to share with us one of the more moving moments or emotional moments in your Paralympics experience. I know, Husna, yours is shorter, but still I think you probably have some emotional or very moving moments from the games, and Amanda, of course. So Husna, can you start? Please share one moment that was very special and emotional for you. It doesn't have to be about accessibility, but whatever you choose.
An emotional moment for me at the Paralympics was standing right behind the blocks and looking at the pole and telling myself that this is it, you've reached to this point, you've really done this. And that just, if it wasn't for the fact that I had to swim that moment, I was probably going to cry. But it was really, really amazing.
Amazing. Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, so mine is a little bit two-part. Being able to compete in the Paralympics after COVID happening. We didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but we finally did. We worked so long training in our environments, like with our teams over and over for 5 years every day. And then we finally got to start. And for us, I think the most moving and emotional moment at the Paralympic Games for me was our quarterfinal against Russia. We had so many moments during the games where we could have chosen an easier route to, play a different team in the quarterfinals and maybe have an easier way to get where we went. But we chose to step up and play the hardest teams to get where we wanted to go. And I think our quarterfinal against the world champions and, kind of eliminating them from the tournament was one of my favorite moments.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I want to thank both of you for sharing your experiences with us. It's nice to see such a young swimmer, so determined, so aware of the world around you, Husna. Is not, I don't take it for granted. I know how young you are, but you are so passionate. And this is exactly what we need as the next generation of Paralympians. People like you that not only think about the medals and the sport, but also how to change the other people's lives around them. Same for you, Amanda. I know you've been doing it for a long time, not just as an athlete, also everything else you do around sport. And I can say for myself that being able to wear different hats, not just the athletical one, not just as a Paralympian, but use our success, use our medals and our and sport to really impact and change people's lives around us. And this is very important also for me. And I'm very, very happy to meet many more athletes, former and current athletes, that don't think just about the way to get the next medal, but also the way, excuse me for being a dreamer, the way to change the world. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the webinar today. I enjoyed it until now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. True inspiration. But Moran, I'm not letting you off the hook so quickly. We heard the emotional and moving and touching moments from our two partners. But what about you?
So actually, it's very hard to choose, but I can share two really amazing moments. So it was my third Paralympic Games, but it was the first time I was inside the village. I was living in the Paralympic village. So before that, I usually was in London and also in Rio. I was outside in an hotel. Actually, in Rio, it was not an accessible room. And that's a different story to tell. But for the 2 weeks I was in Rio, I was playing the chair game. Do you know what the chair game is? Is when you have to transfer from your chair to a different chair in the toilet, and then from that chair to the toilet itself, and then again, and then to another chair inside your shower. So, so being in the Paralympic Village in Tokyo was completely a different experience. The accessibility, the just being able to go around and don't think, oh, where is the accessible toilet? Oh, they are all accessible. That's amazing. So different small things that for me was completely different, and the full experience of being in the village was amazing. And another really, really amazing moment was actually winning my bronze medal in Rio, because it was a very long journey. It was 4 years where I was training for Rio, and my wife, I'm married to a woman, she was trying to get pregnant. We couldn't believe it will all happen in the same year, but it took 4 years to bring our first son to the world. And everything happened in 2016, and he was born 7 months prior to the games. My dream after London was winning a medal and having a child on my lap and having that photo. And everything happened in the same year. And the beautiful story around it is we named him Arad, which means in English, it means bronze. And when I got to Rio, I won the bronze medal. And I have that photo of me with my bronze medal and my bronze child on my lap. And it was just, I couldn't stop crying. It was amazing.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Moran, thank you so, so much. Really. Next speaker, and I'll just tell the comments that we have in the chat. All speakers will be registered to our global website with contact information, so there will be direct contact. So please sign into that website, and I'm sure that amazing conversations will follow this session and the rest of the speakers. Our next speaker is Dr. David Legge. He is a professor in the Department of Health and Physical Education at Mount Royal University in Canada, and he's up since very, very early today, so we really appreciate it. And we'd love to hear what you have to share today, please.
Well, thank you very much. Shalom. Good morning. The sun has finally come up here in Western Canada during this presentation. So it's now a sunny morning here in Calgary. This is a true treat for me. It's a humbling experience. I am admittedly a little anxious speaking in front of some of the luminaries, the icons within the Paralympic movement and the disability movement. So again, bear with me if I do appear a little nervous and anxious. I am going to show a slide deck, and so if you'll permit me, I'm just going to load these right now. Now, can you see my slide deck?
We see your computer, not your slide yet.
Oh, hang on. Let me try this again.
Unshare and
bring this over here. There we go. Let's do this.
Please, yes.
It's working now. Thank you. So the legacy and the impact of the Paralympic Games. I think it's first and foremost important to even define the differences between legacy and impact. So legacy is defined as anything and everything from hosting an event. So that includes the good, the bad, the intended, the unintended. Impact implies some form of causality and intentionality towards a specific outcome. So if I may,
I'm not viewing his screen.
The legacy and the impact of the games. You're able to see my second slide now? Is that right?
No. Yes, yes.
Very good. Thank you. Can you trace a line perhaps to this presentation that I'm giving to you right now as a legacy of the 1964 Paralympic Games, which we were referring to earlier, that Mr. Wagner had a chance to participate in? At that point in time, Canada had not yet participated in a Paralympic Games. But there was a medical doctor by the name of Robert Jackson who was in Tokyo doing his internship, his residency in medical as a medical practitioner. He had heard that Ludwig Gutmann was there. He wanted to meet him, and he did on the site of the Paralympic Games in 1964. He inquired about meeting Canadian athletes that were participating there, of which there were none. Gutmann implored Dr. Jackson to bring a Canadian team to the next Paralympic Games, which he agreed to do. They occurred in Ramat Gan, Tel Aviv, just outside Tel Aviv, in Israel in 1968, and Canada took its first team to those games. So arguably, participation of Canada in the Paralympic movement is directly traced to the 1968 Games in Ramat Gan. So again, a legacy of perhaps those games in 1968. 8 years later, in 1976, when Canada hosts the Paralympic Games in Toronto, Dr. Robert Stedford, the founding president of the International Paralympic Committee, is the chef de mission, the lead administrator for the Canadian team that participates in those games. 20 years following that, in 1995, I decided to pursue a PhD at the University of Alberta, and Dr. Stedford, who's in the image on the bottom right-hand corner with me, the two of us have not aged since 1995. He took me on as his doctoral student, and he took me to my very first Paralympic Games, which were in 1996. And those were the games that Mike Peters competed in seven-a-side soccer. And those are the same games that Amanda was making reference to as far as having a legacy of her participation in the most recent games. Fast forward ahead, I then become involved in the Canadian Paralympic Committee as a result of my participation in Atlanta in 1996 as Dr. Stedford's assistant. I get to meet Osnet from the Israeli Paralympic Committee, and lo and behold, I am presenting here today. So, can you trace a direct line, an impact, or a legacy of the 1964 Paralympic Games to this presentation I'm giving right now? I'm not sure that there's causality there. However, by definition, there is a legacy. And I'm going to speak today about the research that's taken place as it relates to legacy of Paralympic Games. The challenge and the difficulty has been is that a lot of it is anecdotal. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It doesn't mean that it's not relevant, but it's very difficult to trace that causality. And for many of you, you're familiar with the butterfly effect chaos theory, where a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the globe, and then you could make the argument that it's impacting weather on the other. So what I'm going to try to do in my 10 minutes with you is talk about the research that's taken place, and then perhaps provide a bit of a roadmap for moving forward. I would argue that this is an extremely important element within the Paralympic movement, is being able to articulate and argue the importance of legacy, the importance of impact of hosting games. There are a number of cities that have pulled out of bidding, primarily in the Olympic movement, and an example of that would be the Oslo 2022 candidate city that ultimately did not go forward with the bid. I myself was involved with Calgary bidding to host the 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we hosted a plebiscite, not unlike many other cities. And that plebiscite failed. And I would argue that it was in part because we did not do a very good job of articulating the potential impacts and the potential legacies of hosting both the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. The IOC is helping host a conference called Smart Cities and Sports Summit in Copenhagen in a month's time. One of their main topics is looking at the legacy of hosting major games. And in particular, there was just announced yesterday that there'll be a presentation by Paris talking about the health legacy of hosting Olympic and Paralympic Games. Just this morning, a report came out from Vancouver, a city on the west coast of Canada, which hosted the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And they were considering bidding for the 2030 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And just this morning, a report came out stating that perhaps public opinions are not that high anymore about doing so. And in part, you could argue it's because we've not done a great job of articulating the benefits of having hosting games. I'm also remiss, I forgot to introduce myself insofar as how I look and what I'm dressed. I am a white male in my mid-50s. My hair, according to my description, is black, although others might say it's graying. And behind me, I have an image of Rick Hansen, who is a very famous wheelchair track athlete who competed in the Paralympic Games in the 1980s. I'm wearing a gray suit with a light blue shirt. So moving on. So I've talked about why it's important. So what has the research that's been done to date as it relates to legacy and impact? Most of it has been anecdotal. The image that I have in the top left-hand corner is to represent the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. They did make an attempt in the early 2000s leading up to 2010 in doing a global study, which they called the OGI, the Olympic Games Impact Study. They stopped doing it after 2010, in part because what they realized is that every city that they were assessing and measuring, and they had 126 indicators, it was impossible to compare apples to apples. And so Vancouver was very different than Beijing, which was very different than Torino. And so comparing games to games to games was, in their opinion, inappropriate. You're seeing, though, that research and, again, at least commentary related to legacy and impact is taking place at the civic level. So the image in the bottom left corner is an example of a report done by the city of Edmonton, which is in Canada, looking at the social legacies of hosting national championships, state or provincial championships. Sport Canada, of which I've been a part of, has been looking at developing national standards to articulate legacies of hosting games. But if we wanted to look specifically at Paralympic legacies, We have to go back to a book actually that I helped co-edit in the early kind of 2010 area, and it was called Paralympic Legacies. You'll be glad to know that on Amazon's bestseller list, I checked this morning, it's now 4,352,000 in the order. So it's not top 100, but it's in the top 5 million. And I would probably guess that most of those were purchased by my mother and then given to her friends for various holidays. What that book, The Paralympic Legacies, what we did is we tried to look at games. And again, this was published in the late 2000s. Games like the Atlanta 1996 games, and we had people that were involved in those games write a chapter on the legacy of them, but for the most part, they were anecdotal. So very little quantitative, in particular, evidence to demonstrate the legacy of hosting games. Following the publication of that book, I worked with several colleagues, including Simon Darcy from Australia and Laura Meisner here from Canada. And we looked at beyond this idea of Olympic legacy and trying to understand Paralympic legacy. There were very few articles that had evidence to demonstrate the connection of legacy to a Paralympic Games. Lots of anecdotes. Well, and an example of that could have been Amanda, who was talking earlier about Atlanta. So Blaze Sports, which was created following the hosting of the 1996 Games, led to her participation, working at Coca-Cola. Now, perhaps Coca-Cola is going to become a global leader in hiring practices for persons with disabilities. Can you say that that's a direct legacy of the 96 Games? Again, perhaps not specifically quantitative evidence, but anecdotally, I think it makes a compelling story. And then the last image that you'll see on the far right-hand corner is a book that came out of research that we did on the Commonwealth Games, so the British Commonwealth. And those games were in Glasgow in 2014, and the Para-Pan American Games, which were held in Toronto in 2015. And so the Pan Am Para-Pan American Games follow a similar model to the Olympic and Paralympic ones, where there are separate games. The Glasgow Commonwealth Games are unique in that there were 5 events for athletes with a disability within the broader games calendar, or the broader games schedule of able-bodied athletes. So the future of research as it relates to legacy within the Paralympic movement. The image on the bottom left-hand corner is what's referred to as Project ECHO, and this is an ongoing survey that we're doing looking at those 2015 Para-Pan American Games and 2014 Commonwealth Games. And what we're trying to do is connect those dots between the hosting of those games and the legacies that are occurring within those 2 cities, Toronto and Glasgow, Scotland, 6, 7, 8 years later. And again, that has been a challenge, is tracking those legacies post-games. The host organizing committee, once the games are done, they leave. And is there somebody there to actually track the legacies? And that's what we're trying to do in a Toronto and Glasgow instance. I would also say that I'm noticing globally, so the image in the top center is an example from the New Zealand wellness budget, and you're seeing governments now identifying this idea of impact and legacy on a variety of elements and not just economic. And I'm going to suggest that that's the future of research as it relates to Paralympic Games. What's the social legacy? What's the human legacy? What's the environmental legacy in addition to the economic legacy of hosting games? You're also seeing organizations such as the Association of Summer Olympic Federations, which just last week came out with a number of indicators to evaluate and assess games and their impact on the host city and the host region. And lastly, there are other movements such as Special Olympics, and I'm participating in a study with them right now, which is looking at trying to ascertain the legacy, particularly from a social context, of hosting the World Special Olympic Games in Berlin in 2023. So with that, I want to conclude. I do want to express my sincere thanks to my friends and colleagues now at Access Israel. I very much appreciate being asked to present, and this has just been a phenomenal opportunity for me to connect with some really, really cool people. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Unshare the screen, and we are off to our next speaker. And this speaker is the guy that opened the door for us, for so many amazing speakers. And Craig, I'm very thankful for that. I'm happy to invite Craig Spence from the IPC, the Chief Brand and Communications Officer for the IPC. He's an award-winning communicator who joined the IPC in September 2010, and he's responsible for all communication functions at the IPC and acts as their official spokesperson. I'd love for you to share with us the the great campaign that we were talking. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone. A quick description of myself. If Mike Peters said he actually looks younger than he actually is, I'm probably the opposite. So I'm a 42-year-old white male wearing spectacles who's pretending that he's not going bald. And behind me, I have in my office here caricature pictures of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards from the legendary Rolling Stones. Over the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about We the 15, a new human rights movement that we launched on the 19th of August with several organizations to advance the human rights of the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities. So why We the 15? Where does the 15 come from? Well, the 15 is the 15% of the global population that has a disability. And as Mike mentioned in his talk, the IPC has a vision. Our vision is to make for a more inclusive world through parasport. And from when Danny took part in the Paralympics in 1964 to today, the Paralympics has grown into the world's third biggest sport event. Only the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup are bigger. So what we've been wrestling with at the IPC for a number of years now is how can we use the platform of a sport event that attracts 4.25 billion viewers, 3,000 media and attendance. How can we use the platform of this global mega event to advance the human rights of the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities? You've heard today about the impact of the Paralympics in the host city. But for us, we want to go all around the world. We really want to make the Paralympic and the impact of the Paralympics supersonic and have a bigger global impact. So we've worked and developed a campaign called We the 15, and we launched it on the 19th of August. And I'm just going to walk you through it, hopefully now. So, okay, hopefully you should see my slides. Thumbs up if you can see some purple on the screen.
It's great.
Perfect. All right, let's get into it. So We the 15 is a campaign that we launched on the 19th of August, 2 years in the making. What is We the 15? Well, there's so many great actors around the world and organizations trying to advance the human rights of persons with disabilities, but no one works together. So what we've tried to do with We the 15 is bring everyone together who shares our passion for persons with disabilities and making for an inclusive society. So we've developed a campaign with multiple organizations that aligns with the UN 2030 agenda around sustainable development goals, advances the CRPD, but importantly, for the first time, creates a movement that the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities can get behind. Think of the LGBT plus community. That is a community that has made great progress in recent years. Why? They've united behind something. With persons with disabilities, we've never been able to do that. So purple has been a colour which has been long associated with persons with disabilities in the same way that the rainbow flag represents the Pride movement. So we decided that we'd make purple the international colour for disability, and we'd develop a symbol that represented the 15% in society. So you see before you on the screen, I'll describe it now. It's a purple circle with effectively a wedge at 7:35 on a clock face, representing the 15% with a disability. So once we've united organizations of 1.2 billion people behind a movement, what do we want to do? Well, primarily we want to put disability at the heart of the inclusion agenda. You hear all the time about how organizations claim to be inclusive. They talk about gender, they talk about ethnicity, they talk about sexual orientation. They never talk about disability. That has to change. But we can only change that if we unite our voice and make it a louder voice. So we've combined to form We the 15, and now over the next 10 years, we plan to implement a range of activities that target governments, businesses, and the public to really advance a huge population, the world's largest marginalized group. We want to change challenge the stigma attached to disability. We want to break down the barriers that exist that stop persons with disabilities living and fulfilling their lives to their full potential. We want everyone to have the same opportunities. So it's a big campaign. We want to also promote assistive technologies and the role that assistive technologies has in terms of driving social inclusion. So we formed a super group, as I call it. And over the last 2 years, the IPC, together with the International Disability Alliance, spearheading the campaign, we've brought together a super group of organisations covering sport, civil society, policy, business, culture, entertainment. And by working together for the first time, we believe we can initiate much bigger change. So for the first time in history, the IPC, Special Olympics, Invictus Games, Deaf Olympics are working together. That gives us a platform in order to communicate to global audiences about why we need to advance change. You heard recently just there from 3 athletes. We can use our athletes as ambassadors to engage bigger audiences about the issues affecting the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities. This is a human rights campaign, so UN Human Rights is involved. We want to change business, so we're working with the Valuable 500, who've brought together 500 of the biggest businesses around the world to make them more inclusive. It's an advocacy campaign, so we've got Global Citizen involved. We've got Zero Project involved. There's lots of assistive technology work here, so we've got lots of organisations who represent assistive technology. The Paralympic Games are in Los Angeles in 2028. Imagine we could change Hollywood forever. That's why we're working with an organisation called Sea Talent, who are based in Los Angeles and represent lots of actors and actresses and talent behind the cameras who have disabilities. It's just not right in today's age that in a film, a person without a disability plays the role of a person with a disability. You wouldn't do that with race, so why with disability? So we want to change the world. It's as simple as that. And on the 19th of August, we launched We the 15 to a global audience. And to launch it, we had a TV commercial featuring various persons with disabilities from all around the world. And we wanted to show that persons with disabilities are just like anyone else on this planet. But wider society are the people who are stopping them from living to their full potential. So we launched this TV advert, and it went live on TV stations in at least 60 countries around the world. So here's the TV advert with subtitles for your enjoyment.
You're such an inspiration.
It breaks my heart.
You are superheroes.
Really?
Yeah, we're superheroes, all right.
We're getting the kids out the door on time.
We have mortgages.
Yeah, that's what we'll do, mate.
We get married. We met on a blind date.
We can laugh at ourselves, too.
So are the pedestals or not?
And the pity tolerated. Only when you see us.
Can we all break down these barriers
that keep us apart?
So that was the TV commercial. We launched it on the 19th of August, 5 days before the start of the Paralympics. We work with one of the biggest advertising agencies in Europe, who worked for the IPC free of charge and worked on We the 15 free of charge. We work with 3 of the biggest public relations agencies in the world, who gave us their time pro bono to implement this campaign. The media coverage was sensational. More than 3,500 pieces of media coverage in just 2 weeks. Look at the BBC headline on the bottom left-hand corner. We the 15, game changer plan for 1.2 billion persons with disabilities. So we've set the bar very high. We got some amazing coverage all around the world, all talking about We the 15 and the change that we plan to make. So in addition to securing media coverage, we also illuminated 225 iconic landmarks around the world purple on the 19th of August. And here's a selection of the best images.
Landmarks lighting up purple, Storybridge and Victoria Bridge, Brisbane, the Colosseum, Rome, Empire State Building, New York, Piccadilly Circus and the lastminute.com London Eye, London, Titanic Building, Belfast, Olympia Stadion and Botsau, Berlin, Gardens by the Bays, Super Trees and Helix Bridge, Singapore, KL Tower, Malaysia, Tokyo Sky Tree and Rainbow Bridge, Divino Salvador del Mundo, El Salvador, Paris 2024 HQ, and the Élysée Palace, Paris, Hofburg Imperial Palace, Vienna, Brussels City Hall, the Cord Bridge of Jerusalem, Post Tower Bonn, Autobot Headquarter Duderstadt, FMB Stadion Johannesburg, the Amphitheatre at Pula, Bratislava Castle, Bestorks Kantor Aruba, Ljubljana Castle, Friends Arena Stockholm, Olympic Museum Lausanne, Fatih Sultan Mehmet Bridge Istanbul, El Palau de les Arts, Valencia.
So in addition to illuminating 225 iconic landmarks, we used the opening and closing ceremonies of the Tokyo Paralympic Games to engage global audiences. The opening ceremony of Tokyo was watched by 250 million people in 160 countries. And we played out the TV commercial to the global audience. We illuminated the stadium purple, and our president talked about the importance of this campaign during his opening ceremony speech. In the closing ceremony, we again played the TV commercial to an audience of 200 million people, and we spoke about what was going to happen next for We the 15. We also had an advert or a film featuring some of the global leaders behind the campaign. This is not an IPC campaign. This is a campaign for the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities. And we wanted to make a statement that this was lots of people involved. So we had Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And we even had Prince Harry on the video talking about how We the 15 over the next 10 years was going to make a difference for the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities. So the media coverage and the results from the launch has been tremendous. So I mentioned we illuminated 225 landmarks on the 19th of August. On Twitter alone, so we worked with Twitter, Facebook, Google, TikTok to maximize this campaign. 2.4 billion impressions of hashtag We the 15 on Twitter. 750 million people have already watched the campaign film. As I mentioned earlier, over 3,000 pieces of media coverage, all about We the 15 and how we're going to try to transform the lives of so many people over the next decade. And the campaign has reached 6.2 billion people around the world. That's equivalent to 80% of the global population. So we've set the bar very, very high. This is some social media. We want to go for the young generation. We want to, if we can change Generation Z, we'll help the generations to come. So 876 million people on TikTok engaged in the campaign. 750,000 views on YouTube for the campaign. And on Facebook and Instagram, 9.5 million interactions of We the 15 content. So we've set the bar very high. Now you might be asking, well, what happens next? So what does happen next? Well, we're now developing the framework for the campaign for the next 10 years. And we're creating strategic goals that will take us through to the end of the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games. We the 15 will have annual themes. And these will identify things that we want to change in society to make the world more inclusive. So it could be travel, it could be the entertainment industry. But next year in 2022, we're going to focus our attention on assistive technology and the fact that governments around the world have tariffs and taxes on assistive technologies that make them cost prohibitive for the majority. We want to change that. And we want to use the willpower of all the international organizations to make that difference. And as I mentioned, we're going to use the platform of all the upcoming sport events over the next decade to build awareness for this campaign and build engagement. Ultimately, we want to change the world, and we want to change the world for 1.2 billion people. And you can only do that through teamwork. And that's why we're so proud to have brought together 20 of the biggest organizations in the world behind We the 15. we're only scratching the surface, and we're really excited for what we're going to deliver between now and 2030. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope I can count on your support for this campaign over the next decade.
Absolutely. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And as I told Mike, I really feel this is just the beginning of a great relationship, and I'm sure we'll do amazing things together. Thank you very much, Craig, for everything. And I'm very happy, and this, Craig, you should hear, our next speaker is a return speaker, because that's the way it is. When we have such great speakers, we always look for opportunities to bring them back. And I'm very, very happy to bring back Josh Lubner. He's going to talk about media and the Paralympic Games. If you remember, guys, December last year, Josh was really one of the stars there with a fascinating presentation. So Josh, Craig was talking about setting the bar high. Well, you said it for yourself. Let's hear it from you now, please.
Well, thanks so much. And wow, what a wonderful presentation from Craig and everyone else here. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. To self-describe myself, I am wearing a purple sports coat in honor of purple as the color designated towards people with disabilities in a powerful way. Purple has always been one of my favorite colors, and so I'm glad to connect it back to my personal disability. And further to self-describe myself, I'm in a room with a white light in the background and a window, and myself, I have kind of curly dark brown hair, tortoiseshell glasses, and I'm a white male. So a little bit more about my background. I've been in advertising and marketing for 20 years. I'm now completing a PhD focused on disability inclusion in advertising. And when it comes to the Paralympics, wow, there's so many stories to tell about where we are, but also where we were, how that journey has gotten us to a place now that is propelling us so positively forward. 2 words to consider throughout this brief conversation I'll share with everyone: elevating or relegating. How does the Paralympics connect back to branding, marketing, and communications as a whole? The Paralympics is, of course, just for a fleeting few days every few years. And that's an opportunity to elevate when it comes to disability, and brands definitely have connected back to that. The challenge, though, for brands in the past is it has been relegating to where the only time, more often than not in the past, that brands, marketers, advertisers thought about disability was the Paralympics, so that they kind of scratch their heads and they think maybe from an altruistic consideration that, yes, maybe now is the time to incorporate disability in our advertising, but that was it. And so we are seeing this change. We, the 15, of course, in a powerful and bold way, is elevating well beyond the Paralympics. The other thing to consider about these wonderful and amazing athletes is that they are not only athletes that have disabilities during the Paralympics for these few days. Day in and day out, these individuals are disabled. Myself, I'm blind, my left eye fully blind, my right eye, I have a legal blindness. And that happens day in and day out, and I celebrate that, and I'm proud of that. And for these athletes, it's the same consideration. And going back again to elevating or relegating, brands need to recognize that not only are the athletes with disabilities disabled throughout the entirety of the year, but also consumers. People with disabilities want to be able to connect and embrace with brands regularly and repeatedly. And if the only time that we have to show people with disabilities in advertising is for a short amount of time, then those consumers who want to connect with the brand will see an inauthenticity. We'll see a disengagement of how they could or should be connected with that brand. I also want to talk about the definition into the word supercrib. Supercrib is a term that's been used that is a disparaging term, and it's one that where non-disabled people look at people with disabilities who potentially are athletes in a way that people with non-disabilities see that as the only reason that they're an athlete potentially is because of their disability, or that they're overcoming something. And what I would say is that for a brand, there needs to be a purpose for why one wants to incorporate an athlete with a disability, for example, in their advertising, whether it's a beer commercial or an automobile ad, there has to be an authenticity where disability isn't simply seen as a prop in the commercial to propel that brand, to elevate it simply during the Paralympics, but there has to be a genuine connection in the storytelling and in the narrative, so that that individual with a disability who may be a Paralympian isn't just vaulted in the creative because of a quote unquote overcoming something, but because there is some type of genuine connection to that brand. And then as well, what we are seeing now, because of We the 15, because of this spotlight of more media coverage of the Paralympics, of the athletes having their own voices in social media, is a continuing ripple effect where brands are starting to ride a longer wave of connectivity so that they aren't just thinking about disability during the Paralympics, but in any other days as well, which is wonderful. I do want to go back to something that an earlier speaker had mentioned. She was an architect and she spoke about inclusive design. And inclusive design is powerful. It not only helps to be able to welcome people with disabilities in the physical spaces, from ramps to venues and sporting arenas to allow people with disabilities to enjoy experiences at an equitable level. Inclusive design is powerful and positive when it comes to advertising and marketing. Again, going back to considering people with disabilities simply as props in an ad, brands are really moving away from that to seeing, if we are including people with disabilities in the advertising, shouldn't we also look at our product or service that we're offering and see, hopefully, that can be accessible, that person with a disability that we're featuring in the ad can potentially use our deodorant, which, as we've seen from Unilever, was a wonderful global phenomenon where they introduced inclusively designed deodorant, which is something that so many of us just don't even think about. But that Unilever took the time to be able to consider how this product, from a packaging standpoint, from an overall design standpoint, from an advertising consideration, could welcome people with disabilities. So inclusive design is critical to marketing and branding, so that advertising is not only a thin veneer, but rather that deeply entrenched within branding, disability can be a powerful voice throughout the creative process. And to that point, from my perspective in my research, in my doctoral studies, and as well in my professional career, I try to reframe three letters that we often hear when it comes to diversity, and that's D, E, and I. Those letters stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. If we reframe those letters and insert the letter A, we can craft an acronym that I feel is more connective to a larger community. And that word is IDEAS, which stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and successes. In the Paralympics, we're able to recognize athletes from a successful standpoint, those who receive gold, silver, and bronze. But oftentimes in advertising, marketing, and branding, disability was just seen as something where people are patted on their back for maybe doing something altruistic from a branding perspective. But what I'm suggesting with this acronym of IDEAS is that we can measure accessibility, disability inclusion from a success standpoint, from a business return on investment standpoint, with everything that we're doing. We saw that We the 15 isn't simply an ambiguous connection of, yes, there are a certain number of people with disabilities, but they're saying, no, there are 15% of the world has a disability. So for brands, an opportunity to be able to see success from including people with disabilities is a powerful thing that hopefully we can move to well more than just the Paralympics, but as well to celebrate during the Paralympics. I in no way am saying that brands should not advertise during the Paralympics. I'm suggesting that, yes, do that, but how can we plus that even further to welcome people with disabilities even more? I also want to say that major global brands are still struggling. On a regular and repeated basis, I'm very happy to work with global brands to be able to support their branding teams, their marketing teams when it comes to disability inclusion. But it's also a bit frustrating to know that there are people in the marketing, advertising, and branding industry that are still unaware of how to welcome people with disabilities. And so while we are celebrating so many wonderful achievements for brands that are inviting disability in authentically, there are still others that are still struggling. And so that's something to note, is that we are at different places along this journey of inclusion, and that journey is going to continue onward. And then I do want to go back to a brand, Unilever. Unilever did such a wonderful job this year from a global perspective, not only showcasing an inclusive deodorant, which again seems something to be trivial, but it's quite powerful. Unilever called out other brands and suggested in their advertising that to not only look at people with disabilities as part of an ad campaign during the Paralympics, but beyond. Unilever called out gyms and athletic venues to say, hey, people with disabilities sometimes feel uncomfortable in situations in a typical gym to be able to exercise, and that people with disabilities should be able to recreate and exercise just like anybody else. Why is that important? That's important because, again, Paralympic athletes are not only Paralympic athletes for a few days every 4 years. They are Paralympic athletes that need to train every day. So Unilever being able to suggest that gyms and training facilities should be more open to welcoming athletes with disabilities, young people with disabilities, anyone with a disability, is a very powerful thing. Additionally, one final thing to say that Unilever did was that they not only asked gymnasiums, training facilities to welcome people with disabilities, they suggested to hire them. And that is a critical imperative to consider, is that so many brands now, to an extent, are embracing disability, but only from a communication standpoint, and not suggesting that there's an opportunity and need to hire more people with disabilities. Unilever took that bold step and are showcasing that Paralympians, yes, can be celebrated and vaulted on the stage, winning a medal for a few days out of the year, but also that those wonderful athletes could receive valuable income in many other days throughout the year so that they can be hired as trainers to be able to train others. That's where branding needs to go, again, from an inclusive design perspective to, yes, we need to include authentically people with disabilities in advertising, but how much more deeply can we look at the disability community as consumers, as individuals working in the corporate space, as people hopefully with wonderful ideas, inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and success. Anybody can bring a good idea to the table, and disabled ideas are good ideas. I hope that I've added to this conversation, and I'm happy to continue dialogue with anyone and everyone anytime after this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Josh. You know, I couldn't.
Michal, on mute. Michal, on mute.
Thank you for that. I heard that's the most repeated sentence in the last year and a half. You are on mute. So I apologize for being on mute. And Josh, I just said thank you very much. I'm happy I didn't have to stop you because it was interesting. And I'm very, very happy. I think that you are already registered on the International Global website. So your details are there, and further conversations probably will take place knowing you and seeing the reactions here. So thanks a lot. Our next speaker, and might I say no pressure, Ludovine Munoz, the Paris Organizing Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. You have heard, past, present, complexity, challenges, and we are really, really eager to hear what's ahead, what's going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Is it my microphone is okay?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. In first, thank you very much to welcome me in this webinar. It's very interesting and very important to be all together concerning a very important subject. So as I am present, I'm Ludivine Munoz. I'm a former Paralympian and gold medalist in 3 previous Paralympic Games. If I describe me quickly, I'm blonde, I'm wearing a purple dress. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know if I look any younger than my age. I am mother of 2 boys, and I'm so sorry if some noise is around me because it's the holidays in France, and I am in my house. I'm sorry for the next time because my level English is not very good. I didn't use English before working in Paris 2024. So I'm currently working for Paris 2024 in the integration Paralympic dimension in this committee. And more especially, my role is to help each team in charge of Olympic and Paralympic Games to take in account of the specificities of the Paralympic Games. And now I will speak to you what is a project in Paris 2024, especially our action for developing the right and the sport for people with disabilities. In my team, like Iliana explained, I include accessibility for each venues, but more in venues, we include accessibility in general for Paralympian, for spectators, and also venues. We want to upgrade the accessibility in website and anything. It's important for people with disability to have a very, very good experience in Olympic and in Paralympic Games too, because it's more important than Paralympic Games. It's to have a very important experience of the 2 parts of the global event. In first time, it's important to understand that in Paris 2024, we want to have, I don't know, it's a very good term, a very good noun, because it's to have 2 events in the same period. It's Olympic Games before and Paralympic Games before, with everywhere the same level, the same important subject, to guarantee for everyone, everywhere in the world, that it's accessible event in Olympic and in Paralympic Games. I very agree with all the discussion this afternoon. I have the time to hear everyone. It is very important to make this webinar, and I'm very pleased to make this Zoom because the subject was very marvelous. The first ambition of Paris 2024 is to organize a mirror in Olympic and Paralympic Games. We choose every same venue and splendid venues in Olympic like in Paralympic Games. The objective is to have in Paralympic Games the very extraordinary venues, to have very, very good experience for Paralympians, which have the same level of sports like in Olympic Games. For example, we will have the Tour Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower for blind football, Le Grand Palais for the wheelchair rugby. I'm sorry, yes. And for another example, Château de Versailles for para-equestrian. Paris 2024 has shown a common Olympic and Paralympic emblem. I'm sure it's not a simple subject, but now it's very important to understand that the emblem is together the Olympic rings and the agitos. It's very important for Paris 2024 to be sure that everyone knows the 2 parts of this very extraordinary competition. All the competition and the celebration venues will be accessible for people with disability, as will the volunteers program. The objective of Paris 2024 is to have volunteers in Olympic and in Paralympic Games, which can be people with disability, and to guarantee for every volunteer the same experience. In the same subject, all the employees, all the job is open to people with disability. And in my black background, I have an example of the headquarters of Paris 2024. It's a new headquarters, which is totally inclusive and accessible. I'm people with disability, like you know, and it's I worked before different companies during 15 years, and it's my first job, which is including for each part of the headquarters. It's very, very, very interesting. Even we can have toilets, it's normal, but even that we have all room, it's accessible, all the door is accessible, and all the color it shows for blind people. In the same subject, all the Paralympians, 19% of Paralympians will live within 30 minutes of their competition venue, because the Olympic and the Paralympic village, it's in the north of Paris, and it's not far away for the competition. All the venues, the future venues, will be served by public transport. It will be buses, subway, RER, tram, or light vehicle. It's very important to offering accessible option for people with disabilities. It's a very important challenge. I don't know if everyone knows Paris subway. It's a historic subway. It's not the most accessible in the world. The law in France, it's correct because it's important to develop accessibility in the time. So we didn't have to change the law, but the dynamic, it's not the same everywhere. And it's important to use Paralympic game to change the dynamic and to grow the dynamic to be in the good way to have in the future a subway which will be accessible. So for the 3 years for the Paralympic Games, we will have some different solutions for people with disability, like buses or like most solution in mobility. Our ambition is more like venues, is eagerly to have a very important legacy, strong legacy in this society with different action and with focus to develop the sport for people with disability. And as for this subject, we launch some different action. For example, we have a supports club. It's a Paris 2024 club, which now have more than 200,000 members. And all the action with this club is including people and people with disability. In the same way, we have a fund to help sport club to train and to buy equipment for sport for people with disability to increase the capacity to welcome people with disability. And next point, we have a new universal accessibility in this project with the ambition to grow the first ISO certification and to develop an update in this standard. It is a standard for important event like sport, but not just for sport, but example for cultural event. And the objective is to update this first ISO to have an accessibility, universal accessibility point to be sure that all future events will be consider all the important points for accessibility with people with disabilities. We have, in the same way, we have a athlete commission with 19 members, and concerning these 19 members, 5 is Paralympic athletes. So it's important to have their view concerning all the subjects of Paris 2024 to be sure that the Paralympic experience will be taken in our project. Another very important point for me, it's education. The children is the future, I don't know the very good name, the future employers, the future people who can be include people, every people in the society. So during 5 years before, we developed a SMEN, Olympic and Paralympic week. It is a special week during all athletes, all Paralympians come in the school to speak about sport. And in reality, 18% of school take the Paralympic sport like a subject to speak about Paralympic Games in different schools. It's very important to grow the different children to know what is this Paralympic Games, what is performance, what is inclusion, what is accessibility and to develop, in their opinion, this important subject for people with disability. Like I explained, the volunteers program, the education program, and for necessary the accessibility program is be developed in Paris 2024 to be sure that the experience for everyone will be good. Even the venues it's grow before, which work to develop a level and upgrade for all these venues and all accessibility for website, for application, because it's not only venues, it's important to be sure that inclusion now it's more in every subject. That's a quick presentation. What is today the important subject for Paris 2024. And I'm sure that if you have more questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And I'm sure that I can help you to understand what we are growing in this few years for Paris 2024.
Amazing. Thank you very much. As we said, you have your workload and good luck. And I think that I'm speaking on behalf of everybody you heard before. We're here to help, and we'd love to cooperate in any way. And we can't wait for 2024. So good luck to you. And let's talk after the Paralympics in 2024. I'm sure we'll have a great opportunity to compare notes. Thank you very, very much. I'm now very, very happy to invite Dr. Osnat Flis-Duer. She is the Director of Science and Technology in the Israeli Paralympic Committee, and she will present to us regarding technology and sport. Please.
Hello, everyone. I know that it's really late and we are behind time, so I will try to shorten my presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Can I do that? Yep. There we go. Please let me know if you can see my presentation. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And now you can as well?
Now it is not in presentation view. Before it was better.
All right. So I'm going to go back to okay. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today in this really special webinar. And I'm going to share the, actually, I'm not going to talk about technology as I usually do. I'm going to share the outcome of a research that we did in Israel. And the title of my presentation is Paralympians as an Influential Factor on Society's Perception of People with Disabilities. And I did this study with Ifat Engel-Hollander from Jerusalem. A little bit about myself. I have a PhD in rehabilitation sciences and physiotherapy. I'm the Director of Science and Technology in the Israeli Paralympic Committee. I was a member of the Sports Science Committee of the International Paralympic Committee, and I'm a member of the Olympic and Paralympic Sports Medicine and Sports Science Committee of the American College of Sports Medicine. So the Israeli Paralympic Committee has a vision and a mission state, which is the Israeli Paralympic Committee will lead the athletes to the highest level of achievements in the Paralympic Games, will promote national pride and inspiration for Israeli societies. So let's see how we are doing actually, and if we make it happen. The Paralympic movement has 4 values, and the Israeli Paralympic Committee integrates and advocates the Paralympic values in the Israeli society, which is courage, determination, inspiration, and equality. So when people hear or see the word disable, many times it evokes different stereotypes, such as people who are suffering from birth imperfections or victims. We hear that a lot in our country, with the negative karma or with miserable destiny, or people who are struggling to be normal again. So there are many prejudices and stereotypes, and we are aware of that. In addition, there's a tendency to group people with disabilities and to see them as a homogeneous group. And by doing that, we're actually missing the interpersonal differences, and it's also playground to create more prejudice and more negative opinions toward people with disabilities. So we ran a study last year, and the aim was to examine the attitudes of the Israeli society towards people with disabilities in general, and towards athletes in Paralympic sports in particular. We did it online with Google Form. We piloted it and did some adjustments and distributed between January and February 2021, and it was filled anonymously. And we had a return rate of 310 people. Majority were women and different age groups with a majority above 18. And now I will share with you some of the findings, not all the research. In 10 minutes, it's impossible to share all the findings. So just the main result, how we are doing here in Israel when it comes to perceptions and attitudes. So the first question was, do you think there are prejudices about people with disabilities in Israel? And yes, the majority say that there is a moderate to very much level of prejudice about people with disabilities in Israel. And then we ask, do you think Israeli society equally accepts people with disabilities? And here again, we see that no, the society in Israel thinks that the people in Israel don't treat equally and don't accept equally people with disabilities. And then we ask, personally, do you equally accept people with disabilities? And here we see a shift. So when you ask people about the general population, they would say, yes, there are prejudices. But when you ask someone about himself or herself, then over sudden, no, I treat people equally. And this is just a remark. We have a name for this attitude, and it's called aversive ableism, which is a modern prejudice toward people with disabilities. So there are patterns of conscious and unconscious disability prejudice. Aversive people believe they are not prejudiced. In fact, democratic values are important to their self-image, yet they often unknowingly act in prejudiced ways in scenarios where their prejudice is less overtly evident. And that's what we found here. Then we had another question, meeting people with disabilities can naturally arouse different emotions. What emotions do you have when meeting a person with a disability? And we allow them to mark more than one answer. And we gave different emotions like anger and admiration and empathy and so on. And what we see that in the first, like the majority stated that the emotion is empathy. And then the next one was pity. And actually both emotions are based on a little bit prejudice, because actually if you ask people who work and being around people with disabilities, we have no special emotion when I see somebody in a wheelchair, right? I just think, well, I hope he does sport. What sport does he do? But when somebody holds emotions, it means he has some kind of prejudice. And then we asked, have you heard or been exposed to Paralympic sports? And here we were quite happy because more than 60% were aware of Paralympic sports in our country. And we asked, in Israel, do athletes with disabilities engage in sports professionally as their main occupation? And here we were happy about this finding that 63% knew that athletes are engaged professionally in Paralympic sports nowadays. Then we asked, do you think the state should encourage and support people with disabilities to engage in sports activities? And the majority said that yes, the country should encourage people to be involved. And then we asked, do you think the achievements of the Paralympic athletes improve the attitude towards people with disabilities in Israel? And yes, so we got an agreement of moderately to high agreement that the Paralympians play important role in changing attitudes towards the people with disabilities in general. And then we asked something about the honor that our Paralympians bring. We asked the Paralympic athletes bring more honor to the state of Israel than the Olympic athletes. Do you agree with this statement? And 62% agreed that the Paralympians bring more honor than the Olympics. And this is also based on prejudice, probably. And then we asked, is it possible that a Paralympic athlete will participate in the Olympic Games? And we were so happy to see that 80% knew that actually a Paralympian can be Olympian. And that's thanks to people like Oscar Pistorius and some other people who advocated and fought for the right to compete in both games. So the people in Israel were aware of that fact. And then we asked, do you think the award for winning a Paralympic medal should be equal to winning an Olympic medal? And actually, that's the case in Israel. And yes, the majority think that a Paralympic medal should be awarded the same as Olympic medal. So some of the conclusions, our findings revealed that the overwhelming majority of people were prejudiced against people with disabilities in our country. And the most common form of prejudice was aversive ableism, where they consciously had a little prejudice, but unconsciously were prejudiced against people with disabilities. According to the current survey, about 85% of the participants think that the achievements of the Paralympic athletes improve society's attitude towards people with disabilities. In addition, they are proud and feel a sense of respect toward our Paralympians. Israeli society is moderately exposed and aware of the Paralympic sports, which is a good job of our media. And as National Paralympic Committee, we should encourage our athletes to be the ambassadors and advocates, since they have an important role in changing Israeli society's attitude toward people with disabilities. Thank you so much.
Wow, amazing, amazing. And I just want to grab a cup of coffee with you and talk. And we are in the same country, so it is possible. I always don't understand the reaction of people when they hear what I do, saying, wow, they're so amazing. They can be annoying, they can be amazing, they can be beautiful, they can be everything.
Just like everyone else, and we still have a lot to do. So Access Israel, there's a lot of work to do in order to change the attitudes of people in Israel toward people with disabilities.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and thank you very much, and thank you for being so on time. That's amazing. So to our next speaker now. Access Israel is partners with an amazing organization in the U.S. Called FASER, Friends of Access Israel, with the CEO, Jamie Lassner. And when Jamie calls and says, listen, I have the perfect speaker for you, and recommended Ian Kropp from Citi's global sponsorship team, we knew we have to have him. He is a good friend of FASER and a remarkable ambassador of Citi for people with disability. And we'd love to hear from the side of the sponsors. What is this? How do you do it? What does it do to you? Please, Ian, we're looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you, Michal. I really appreciate it. And for those that may not be able to see me, my name is Ian Kropp, and I am a white male. My background is actually a Citi and IPC Paralympic logo, and then beyond that, it's a kind of a image or a pattern of kind of some Japanese patterns, and we use this as some of our Zoom backgrounds for our employees during the Paralympic Games. So, I really appreciate this opportunity, and following up on some of the previous speakers, I think Josh mentioned kind of talking about what brands can do and maybe some things that they shouldn't do, but Citi is somewhat new in the Paralympic space. So I want to thank everyone for giving us the time and we hope to follow off the work that so many of you have done. And so one of the things when we first started our Paralympic partnership, we kind of looked at our colleagues, and the partnership, the aims of it are to change perceptions of individuals with disabilities, and diversity and inclusion are imperatives at City. And so we really wanted this partnership to kind of show that we don't just talk about the disability inclusion, we act upon it, because a lot of companies you probably see kind of talk about it in kind of a way that isn't really tangible. And they say that they're for it, but we really don't know what they do. So we thought this partnership would be an amazing opportunity to do that. And, we started in 2018 and the growth has just been phenomenal. And I'm sharing a presentation here right now. I'm just going to go over some of the growth that we've seen, but the partnership's grown in so many different ways. I think one of the ways that we're really impressed was initially we started with 18 different markets, and just from kind of word of mouth and seeing how popular the partnership was, 5 of our markets signed up and paid their own funds to sign on with national Paralympic committees. We've had 7 markets sign athletes on their own so they could be a part of this program. And one thing that's been wildly successful for us, a lot of the CEOs in each country have really taken charge and leaned into the partnership. And they've tapped into athletes for not just events with our colleagues, but with our clients, with our consumers, with key community partners as well. And so that's been something that's really helped drive the partnership as well. And as all of you probably know, the athletes are key to this. And the athletes are just amazing individuals, but can speak so well on so many different topics. And, we've invited athletes to speak, again, at internal events, external events. And one thing that we've really challenged them to do is speak their mind. Our CEO in 2018, when we launched our Global Disability Affinity, said, we really need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we need to really look at what we're doing in our practices, because frankly, when it comes to hiring individuals with disabilities, we're really far behind. We know that, and that's something we want to improve. And we think that this partnership is a great opportunity to tap into so much talent across the globe. There are so many Paralympians who are really well established in their careers, and maybe it's a talent pool we can tap into, but even at a youth and grassroots level, as athletes are developing, can we maybe bring them on as interns? Can we kind of put them into a hiring program? But, one thing I wanted to share about this partnership that has been really impressive, and I think there's definitely a need for it in a lot of what we do, is allyship. And what I mean by allyship is individuals who may not be disabled, how they have kind of embraced the partnership and really kind of pushed for change at City and in their communities. So as an example of that, in a lot of our markets, we have disability affinities, but in some, we haven't started them yet. And in one of our markets, the Philippines, a few of the folks there were really kind of inspired by our whole partnership. They decided to start their own disability affinity. Now, none of them are individuals with disabilities, but they saw the real opportunity and the need for it. And so they started a program there. We've also really seen some great success in terms of self-ID. And at City, one of the challenges we face is a lot of individuals with disabilities have been kind of somewhat, tentative to reveal that they have a disability and potentially ask for accommodation. So through this partnership, we've leveraged some of our Paralympians, and we've really started a program where we're pushing more for self-ID. But with that, kind of sharing and showing the all of the accessibility tools and accommodations that we have. And so one thing I think also with this partnership, we really wanted to give a voice to individuals with disabilities. And that started with our campaign that we ran for Tokyo. And as you can see with the creative here, we really wanted to lean into the athleticism, not kind of the story of their disability, but we still wanted to show that we have athletes who are disabled, but they're phenomenal athletes. And this whole campaign was driven through insights from the athletes. So from the very beginning, we looked to leverage their thoughts about how they want to be seen, how they want to be heard. And so that's something that has not only permeated for this campaign, but a lot of our other marketing campaigns. And so now we're looking to find ways to make individuals with disabilities kind of commonplace in all of our internal and external marketing and communications, because I think showing an individual with a disability as we're looking to promote this partnership is one thing, but kind of imbuing that in everything we do, that's something that we really want to continue to do. And so, you know, again, as we look at this partnership and how we hope to grow it, I think one of the key things is just continue to leverage the athletes, but also, you know, in our communities, not just support the Paralympians who are going to the games, but those who may be looking to get to the games, because we know that the funding sometimes isn't there for them. So supporting that grassroots level, but also supporting some of the recreational level. I mean, we've seen the power of sport, whether it's working with some of the veterans who are coming from an injury and looking to reintegrate into life, just the power of sport and how it can kind of reintegrate folks and show them what they're capable of. So I think our Paralympic partnership is something we're super proud of. And we hope if there's anybody out there who wants to work with us, please reach out. We're more than happy to. And lastly, I wanted to mention in Israel, you know, we just started our disability affinity there, and we're also actively looking to recruit folks with our innovation lab and elsewhere. So we're proud of the work that we've done globally, but equally proud of the work we're looking to do in Israel.
Amazing. So we should talk about that definitely. Ian, thank you very, very much. I can't believe it. We are a little bit late because of all the technical glitches today. But guys, I'm really saving, I won't say the best because people might be offended. Not the best, but definitely one of the best to last. I invited our dear, dear friend, Victor Kalisi, to say the closing statement for this webinar. Pascal, now we hear you? Okay, so I'm very, very happy and honored to invite our dear friend, Victor Kalisi. First of all, he's a past Paralympian and New York City's Commissioner for People with Disabilities, and a true partner. He's a return guest to our webinars. Wherever we can, we love Victor to come and talk. And by the way, Victor, some of the comments we received were, are you going to even talk about the winter, winter sport Paralympians or winter sport games? Here we are.
All right.
To sum it all up, Victor Kalisi.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you, Access Israel. It's great to see people from around the world today. I know the numbers started at 167, and I think we're down to 90. So everyone's very tired of the today. I mean, there's been a lot of things that have been covered.
Thousands will hear later and watch later. Keep the spirits up.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing, Michal. But I am a white male wearing all black, black glasses, salt and pepper long COVID hair, and I'm in a wheelchair, and I'm a white male. So not many people know me as a Paralympian. And Michal, it's not a past Paralympian, it's a Paralympian. Once a Paralympian, always a Paralympian. I competed in the 1998 Games in Nagano, Japan, on the first USA sled hockey team. It's interesting because all the sled hockey teams after us won a medal. We never had an opportunity to win a medal, but nonetheless, my heart is there. And sled hockey is a winter sport, and winter sports are coming up, and it's coming up in Beijing. We're excited to see that happen. Lots of hockey and curling and downhill skiing and cross-country skiing, biathlon. So we're looking forward to that. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see one Paralympic game actually piggyback off another Paralympic game, because that's never happened before. So we heard a lot today. We heard about 15% of the global population has a disability. We are hearing about the legacy. We heard Danny Wagner talking about his experience in 1964 And what did he say? He said that it was a crapshoot, right? It was a nightmare. They were on a plane and they got piggybacked and carried like sacks of potatoes. Thinking about how the games have been a quantum leap since 1964, and all the accessibility that we've been hearing about designing for the future, including people with disabilities, making sure that we're involved from the beginning to the end, making sure design is important, right? We heard Mike Peters talk about 40 new facilities and that hotels are accessible with curb cuts and accessible transportation, things that are built from the start, and we're striving to help people with disabilities. The return on disability, the return on investment in disabilities, right? And taking money into the disability sport world. We just heard City talk about funding grassroots projects. Major organizations, I've worked with City on a lot of different things, and good to see that their funding is available to that. We heard about allyship from City, right? We need allies in our movement to be able to push this Paralympic Games. We heard a lot about people with disabilities and the cultural environment and how that equals accessibility. Can change the culture and environment for people with disabilities if we include us in everything we have to offer. And sport really is that mechanism. Without sport, I am not in the position that I am today. Without sport, I don't have the drive and the competition that I'm always pushing for other cities to make their city the most accessible city in the world. These are the things that drive me, and it's because sport has ingrained that in me in every step of the way. One thing that I often talk about, and you'll hear me talk about it from time to time and continue to talk about it, is that we have a data deficit. We're not truly represented in the data. But one thing that we, the 15, was able to drive is talk about how many clicks they've had, how many people they've reached, how many millions and millions of people through platforms, right? Through social media platforms. That's quantifiable. Those are things that we can build. Those are things that we can measure. That's how we drive disability. Disability sport is part of everything, but it's important that we make things accessible, making sure that our playgrounds are accessible, because that's where kids meet. Kids meet up in those essential places, having that commitment to making our playgrounds and our parks accessible so people with disabilities can gather at that young age, so they're included in every step of the way, making sure that our schools are including disability sport in there, and making sure that nonprofit organizations are continuing to get support from places and corporations like City to really drive sport to the new realm. Sport is upon us. Sport is with us. Sport drives us. Sport is part of everything that we do. And as a Paralympian and as a commissioner of the mayor's office for people with disabilities for the next 2 months here in New York City, I welcome the change. Sport is changing things, and we're all part of it. Thank you, Michal. What a great thing to be part of today. And keep it going.
Thank you very much, Victor. And I loved what you said about connecting the accessibility of parks. Children start dreaming, start understanding they're able and capable at a young age. I think we heard Husna saying how when she went to swim for the first time or at the beginning of her career as a 3, 4, 5-year-old, she had a sports. And her brother has a sports, and each, I'm not sure, I think it's Amanda who said that. So this is what we're talking about. We did begin this webinar about Paralympic sports, but of course the effect is a ripple effect, like Yuval said at the beginning, and this is what we're aiming at. Victor, thank you very much, as always, face to face as soon as possible. And this is the end, and I do want to end. Usually I begin with this, but I want to end now by saying thank you. Thank you first and foremost to the Access Israel team who is making us look good and look professional. We have here a ton of people, but leading them is Noah Biron She's the manager of the international affairs at Access Israel. Thank you, Noah, and Tuvia Scheinfeld, who is doing all the technical and innovative things here, and everybody else who assisted. And of course, Yuval, who dreams. And, I must share with you, Moran Samuel, we turned to her a month and a half ago before we sent out the first publication. And we said, this is the subject. Now we're having to fill in the speakers. I'm not sure she believed that we'll receive such amazing speakers, but we have. So thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the participants. And guys, we will see you December 3rd in the next webinar that is going to be hopefully live from Expo 2020 Dubai. So
I did believe, Michal. I did believe.
You did. You're an optimistic.
I just wanted to see the magic happen. That's all.
So it happened.
And
it happened. Yes. Thank you very much, guys. And have a great, great day and night and morning, depending on your time slot. And great to see you all. And thank you to our amazing sign language interpreters and translators, simultaneous translator. Thank you very much and have a great, great day. It's time to unmute and say bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
מיכל, אנחנו ניפגש.
ביי ביי, בשמחה.
מיכל, עכשיו את שומעת אותי? זאת פסקל?
Oh, Pascal, now you're coming. Okay, guys, everybody back. Pascal.
Bye from Uganda.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
Pascal.
Bye from Uganda.
Bye, Pascal.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye לכולם.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Michal.
Bye-bye, להתראות. עוד לא?
Noah, remember my offer's still up.
Oh my God.
The sun is rising here.
Bye, guys.
You're so welcome. Look forward to next time. Bye-bye.
Sure.